Chapter 570 You Black Wizard. Although the cost of 5 magic crystals had turned the test officer's complexion a sickly shade of green, the lost magic crystals were of little importance compared to the final results of the evaluation. Is the test apparatus broken? The test officer hurriedly began checking the test apparatus. SS rank rating. This was a rating never before seen in the history of White River City. Not even in the entire Star Moon Kingdom had there ever been someone with an SSS rank. Isn't the apparatus exaggerating the result a little too much? Shi Feng was similarly skeptical. Based on what he remembered of his past life, even a decade after God's Domain's launch, there had never been an NPC who had received an SSS rank. The maximum rating known to players was S rank, and one could count such occurrences with their fingers. After an A rank NPC officially became a guard, there was a possibility for them to become a Dark Gold guard. However, the probability of this happening was so low that it was negligible. Only NPCs with S-rank ratings had a decent chance of becoming a Dark Gold guard. Back when the first S-rank rating NPC appeared, the news had shaken God's Domain, and many Apex characters had fought fiercely to obtain said NPC. There was a 100% probability to nurture a Dark Gold guard into a Tier 5 class. If one were willing to pay the price, there was even a possibility to nurture said NPC into a Tier 6 God-ranked guard. Back then, Tier 5 players were as rare as a phoenix's feather, not to mention Tier 6 God-ranked players. If a Tier 5 player emerged in a guild, it would not be strange to see the guild to celebrate for 3 days and 3 nights, not to mention obtaining a Tier 5 personal guard. A Tier 5 NPC was much stronger than a normal Tier 5 player. First of all, there was the difference in attributes. In the absence of any equipment, the base attributes of an NPC were significantly higher than a player's. The second reason was equipment. In God's Domain, the equipment guards wore and that of players was different. Top-tier equipment for guards could be purchased from an NPC shop, which included epic equipment and set equipment. If one were lucky, they could even purchase a piece of fragmented legendary equipment. In other words, one could purchase top-tier equipment for a guard as long as one could afford it. As for players had to expend a ton of effort just to obtain Dark Gold equipment, not to mention epic or fragmented legendary equipment. Hence, as long as a personal guard became a Tier 5 class, their strength could immediately reach the peak of Tier 5. On the other hand, players had to obtain weapons, equipment and other items that were suited to their Tier 5 classes, one piece at a time, slowly and gradually increase their strength. If the public knew of Anna's SSS rank, it would cause a sensation to sweep throughout the entire God's Domain. It seems that I have truly hit the jackpot this time, Shi Feng said as he looked at Anna, who currently wore a blank expression, laughing. He only knew about the ratings reaching a maximum of S rank. He had never heard anything about an SSS rank. Such NPCs might have appeared in the past, but if the player involved did not reveal the information, who would know about it? Moreover, a majority of the powerful guards in the past had not been ordinary NPCs. Instead, these guards were directly recruited from NPCs who already possessed a class or high-tiered NPCs. After all, NPCs capable of reaching a high tier were extraordinary in their own right. They would have vast growth potential, naturally. However, the higher-tiered an NPC was, the more difficult it would be to recruit them. It would require a lot more time and effort. Although Shi Feng did not know how high Anna's growth potential could reach, with an SSS rank rating at the very minimum, she should be a fine gold guard. After some time passed, the test officer was finally certain that nothing was wrong with the test apparatus, and he could not help but turn to look at Anna in shock. There were also hints of reverence in the test officer's gaze. Miss Anna, you are the first person in our White River City's history to obtain an SSS rank. According to the rules of the Adventurers Association, you are now an honorary elder of the association. We will prepare a suitable epic set equipment as well as a Tier 1 class emblem for you. We will also dispatch a special instructor from the association to guide you. Please wait here for a moment. At this moment, the test officer addressed Anna with immense respect. He displayed even more humility in front of Shi Feng. To NPCs, Shi Feng was merely a grand noble. However, as someone with an SSS rank, Anna was destined to become a peerless powerhouse in the future, the overlord of an area. She even possessed the status of an honorary elder in the Adventurers Association. No matter how one looked at it, Anna's status far surpassed Shi Feng's. Lord Viscount, as the referrer, the Adventurers Association will also gift you a special reward. Please wait here for a moment as well. After saying so, The test officer rushed out of the testing room to contact the upper echelons of the Adventurers Association. Shi Feng then went to the VIP reception room next to the testing room. Time passed little by little. Players continued to enter and leave the testing room, one after another. Yet, despite very few players leaving with a smile, the stream of players arriving to recommend the NPC of their choice was endless. It would be great if I could obtain a test apparatus for myself. Shi Feng watched the line of players enviously. Compared to the money the Adventurers Association earned from conducting tests, the candlelight trading firm only earned spare change. However, the precondition to earn money via tests was to set up an Adventurers Association of his own. Meanwhile, each city could only have one Adventurers Association. If players wished to construct an Adventurers Association of their own, they first needed to establish a town or city. After completing this quest, it should be about time to prepare. Shi Feng began to consider establishing his own city. If a large guild wished to earn enough money to become self-sustaining, it needed its own territory. A guild residence was not enough, the guild would need a town. This was also why in the past so many guilds had fought each other to the bitter end. The profits a player-established city offered far exceeded anyone's imagination. Compared to the money one could earn from constructing their own city, the money one could earn from setting up a trading firm was nothing. Only, it was extremely difficult for players to construct their own cities. Even if players succeeded, its defense was another big problem. Although Shi Feng could not yet construct his own city, he could prepare to do so. That way, by the time his guild possessed sufficient strength, he could establish a small city of his own swiftly. Meanwhile, the biggest problem one would face when constructing a city was the various resources required. The manpower and material resources required could instantly bankrupt a first-rate guild. This would be the case even for the current Zero Wing. Among the most important resources required were the forging designs for various buildings, magic array matrices, and so on. Without these key items, even if Shi Feng managed to gather the required wood, stones, and other raw materials, he could only stare at them. If he wanted to obtain these forging designs and magic array matrices, he would have to raid the dark forces and large-scale team dungeons throughout the continent of God's domain. Just as Shi Feng pondered about how he should go about procuring those forging designs, the heavy wooden doors of the reception room parted, and 3 NPCs walked in. Of the 3 NPCs, one was the test officer, one was a black-clothed old man wearing a black felt hat, and the other was a proud and pretty lady dressed in luxurious robes. The old man in black was a level 200 Tier 4 black wizard with practically the same strength as White River City's magistrate, Weissman. He was also one of the NPCs protecting White River City. Meanwhile, the lady was a level 180 illusionist, a Tier 3 class of a summoner. Chapter 571, Taboo. Both the Tier 3 illusionist and the Tier 4 black wizard were NPCs at the very top of White River City. With both of these great characters going out of their way to come here, one could see just how much importance the Adventurers Association was placing on Anna. "Who's the one who achieved an SSS rank?" the black wizard Glyn asked. "Association Master, Miss Anna has earned that rank," the test officer hurriedly said. Glyn's glowing green eyes immediately began to size up Anna, who stood behind Shi Feng. Although Glyn's actions held no ill intent, Shi Feng could still feel an immense pressure from his gaze, his movements growing sluggish as a result. If Shi Feng, a Tier 1 player, reacted in such a way, the pressure that an NPC who had yet to become an adventurer felt would be even greater. Yet, Anna showed no reaction as if she had not felt the pressure from Glyn at all. "Sure enough, your concentration is extraordinary," the black wizard Glyn laughed, satisfied. "We haven't had a talent in White River City for many years now. I didn't think that the next one would be so extraordinary. Irene, I'll leave this little lady in your care. You are the strongest summoner in our White River City's Adventurers Association. If you fail to guide her properly, I will find you. Association Master, please rest assured. I will nurture Anna with every resource I have," the Tier 3 illusionist Irene said, chuckling. "All right, show this little lady around the association and familiarize her with the place for now." Glyn nodded as he caressed his white beard. He then looked at Shi Feng, saying, "You must be the brat who recommended the little lady, right?" Shi Feng nodded silently. The high-tiered NPCs of God's domain all possessed extremely high intelligence. As for Glyn, the association master of an adventurers association, he possessed intelligence that far surpassed even ordinary humans. Moreover, he also wielded immense authority in White River City. A single word for him could end Shifeng's career here. Hence, before such an NPC, Shifeng had to maintain a certain degree of humility. If he dared to act conceited in front of an NPC like Glyn, he would suffer for it. In the past, only after countless players had gone down that route had they understood the importance of propriety. Since you have introduced such a genius to White River City, as the Association Master of White River City's Adventurers Association, I will not be stingy with you. Since you are a Tier 1 swordsman, this item should suit you. If you can master it, you will face fewer hardships on the road ahead, Glyn said as he took out a gray book surrounded by an ancient aura. The word Taboo graced the bottom right corner of this old, gray book. Taboo skill. Shifeng was stunned. There were many skills in God's domain. However, a majority of them were ordinary skills. Their might was only subpar, and they could not increase a player's combat power significantly. Only those rare skills could impact a player's combat power. For example, the skills Shifeng had learned such as Thundering Flash and Thunder Flame Explosion were rare skills. These skills allowed a player to fight an enemy that was slightly stronger than they were. Meanwhile, sure kill skills were stronger than rare skills. These skills had the ability to instant kill players of the same level, changing the tide of battle. One such skill was Shifeng's Flame Burst. However, there was an even more powerful type of skill that could allow players to threaten enemies that were stronger than themselves. This type of skill was known as a Taboo skill. The gray book Glyn had just revealed was a skill book for a Taboo skill. A Taboo skill even allowed players to challenge enemies of a higher tier. The instant Shifeng received the gray book, he inspected it. Instant Strike, Tier 2 Taboo skill. Utilizing the power of thunder, instantly move in front of the target. For the next 3 seconds, attack speed increased by 500%, and each attack will deal 400% damage to the target and inflict the serious numbness effect. Instantly kill targets below 20% HP. Cooldown 1 hour. Class restriction, Swordsman. Isn't he a little too generous? He actually gave me a Tier 2 Taboo skill. Shifeng was slightly surprised after reading the item description. Taboo skills were different from other skills. They did not require proficiency to upgrade, and players of any level could learn them. Only one needed to fulfill certain conditions before they could learn them. Taboo skills were also categorized into different tiers. Tier 1 Taboo skills were the most common, and only players who were Tier 1 or higher could display their maximum potential. The effects of a Tier 1 Taboo skill could rival even an ordinary Tier 2 skill. Tier 2 Taboo skills were slightly rarer, and only when players obtained their Tier 2 classes could they fully display the skill's might. Their effects could rival a Tier 3 skill. Tier 3 Taboo skills were extremely rare, and only a few players would actually get the chance to learn such a skill. However, any Tier 3 players who learned such a skill would struggle to find a worthy opponent among players of the same tier because a Tier 3 Taboo skill was just as strong as a Tier 4 skill. Even a Tier 4 player would lose over half of their HP, not to mention Tier 3 players. As for Tier 4 Taboo skills, their rarity could rival even legendary items. Tier 5 Taboo skills were little more than legend. If a Tier 5 player grasped such a skill, they could even pose some threat to a Tier 6 God-ranked player. Hence, one could just imagine the rarity of a Tier 5 Taboo skill. Based on Shifeng's knowledge, there had only been a single person who had learned a Tier 5 Taboo skill throughout the entire God's domain in the past. Back then, that person had become the most powerful player below Tier 6 God-ranked players as there was no Tier 5 player capable of defending against that person's Tier 5 Taboo skill. In addition, that person's skills and equipment were top-notch in God's domain. Hence, he had been publicly acknowledged as the #1 player beneath Tier 6. Currently, players' average level was only slightly over level 20. The majority of players in God's domain had not even obtained their Tier 1 classes yet. Meanwhile, Shifeng had obtained a Tier 2 Taboo skill. Even if he did not possess any level or equipment advantages with this Tier 2 Taboo skill, it was still possible for him to instant kill any enemies that were Tier 2 or below. Even if he couldn't kill them instantly, he could still inflict heavy damage. If he factored in his level and equipment advantages, as long as he managed to grasp this Taboo skill, he would stand at the very peak of all Tier 2 classes. It was the same even if he stood against an NPC. Of course, God's domain was fair. If one wished to obtain great power, they first needed to pay the appropriate price. Although Taboo skills could increase a player's strength, the learning processes of Taboo skills and ordinary skills were different. Taboo skills could not be learned by the click of a button. One needed to train with a taboo skill. That's right, they needed to train. Players were required to learn the movements recorded in the skill book, and at the same time fulfill the book's learning requirements. Most importantly, one needed to achieve a completion rate of 90% or above to learn the taboo skill. Moreover, the higher a taboo skills tier was, the more difficult it would be to learn it. Some taboo skills were so difficult that even expert players could not learn them. Hence, many players who had obtained taboo skills had complained about this in the past. However, there were even more players who gloated over their misfortune. So what if you were lucky? Even if you obtained a tier 6 taboo skill, what would it matter if you couldn't learn it? Due to this, taboo skills had become many players' heartache. In the past, many players had no choice but to trade with others for a lower-tiered taboo skill after obtaining a high-tiered taboo skill. After all, there was no point to owning a high-tiered taboo skill if one could not learn it. Fortunately, it is only a tier 2 taboo skill. If it were a tier 3 taboo skill, I would have no choice but to treat this thing as a decoration. Shifeng was very satisfied with the taboo skill Instant Strike. As long as I learn this, I will have a much easier time when I go to the Dark Denver. In the past, the most powerful taboo skill Shifeng had learned was a tier 3 taboo skill. However, the price and time required for learning one were simply too high. The conditions were not something players at his current level could meet. However, even a tier 2 taboo skill was extremely difficult for current players to learn. Other than the fact that only tier 2 classes or above were capable of displaying the full potential of a tier 2 taboo skill, tier 2 taboo skills were labeled as tier 2 because tier 2 or higher players had a much easier time learning them. In the past, many tier 3 players had only managed to learn a tier 2 taboo skill after a lot of struggle. One could just imagine how difficult it was to grasp a taboo skill. Soon, Shifeng left the Adventurers Association. Currently, Anna was still a classless NPC. She would have to spend the next week building her foundations to become an adventurer. Naturally, Shifeng would not wait inside the Adventurers Association for an entire week. First and foremost, he needed to learn the taboo skill Instant Strike. After Shifeng returned to the candlelight trading firm, without hesitation, he entered a private lounge and began studying the skill book. I wonder what the conditions are? Hopefully they won't be too harsh. Chapter 572, 100% completion rate. Inside the quiet private lounge, Shifeng impatiently opened the thick and heavy skill book. The moment Shifeng flipped to the first page of the book, the sound of a system notification rang out by his ears. System, do you wish to bind and learn this skill book? Reminder, skill book cannot be traded once bound. Shifeng immediately chose to bind the skill book to himself. In the past, many players had bound a taboo skill to themselves without knowing the difficulty of the taboo skill they were about to learn, afraid that the taboo skill would suddenly grow legs and run away. However, such a rash decision had filled many players, who had obtained high-tiered taboo skills, with deep regret. However, the taboo skill Shifeng had right now was only tier 2. Even if he failed to learn it now, he could try again once he became a tier 2 class. He would not waste this valuable taboo skill. After binding the skill book, the contents of the book finally appeared. Shifeng promptly began studying one word at a time. Inside the skill book, other than some texts and pictorial introduction, there was a holographic video depicting the use of Instant Strike, which allowed players to grasp the techniques required to activate the skill quickly. Taboo skills in God's domain were similar to the spells used by magical classes, in which they were very strict about their use. When magical classes cast a spell, incantations and hand gestures were of the utmost importance, particularly when tracing runes. Only when these actions reached a certain completion rate could magical classes display great power. Taboo skills were the same. These skills relied heavily on the accuracy and fluency of the player's footwork, body movements, and attack patterns. Even the slightest mistake could result in a failure to activate the taboo skill. Compared to casting spells, players were required to have far more delicate control over their own bodies. They needed a clear understanding of each and every motion that was involved. Without realizing it, more than an hour had passed. Currently, Shifeng was only halfway through the skill book. Any ordinary person would have long since begun to practice the taboo skill. However, Shifeng was not in a hurry as he examined each page carefully. After more than 3 hours, Shifeng's heart suddenly sunk, and he frowned at the gray book. Skill completion rate must reach 95%. Moreover, I'll also need to absorb 100 thunder crystals from Thunder Beast Kings. Isn't this joke going a little too far? A bitter laugh escaped Shifeng's lips as he gazed at the instant strike skill book on the table. Although he had known that a Tier 1 class could not easily learn a Tier 2 taboo skill, he had not expected the difficulty to be so high. Shifeng had learned a few taboo skills in the past, so he was quite knowledgeable on the topic. Tier 1 taboo skills normally required players to achieve a 90% completion rate. To ordinary players, this alone would prevent them from ever learning a Tier 1 taboo skill. Even experts would require long periods of bitter training to achieve such a high completion rate. Not to mention, there were usually other conditions that needed to be fulfilled as well. Tier 2 taboo skills normally required a completion rate of 93%. Only at Tier 3 would a taboo skill require a 95% completion rate. Yet, Instant Strike as a Tier 2 taboo skill, required Shifeng to achieve a 95% completion rate. However, this was still not the largest challenge. The point that had left Shifeng truly speechless was the 100 Thunder Crystals that he needed to obtain through killing Thunder Beast Kings. Shifeng was very familiar with Thunder Beast Kings. These monsters inhabited a location not far from a level 50, 100-man large-scale team dungeon. Thunder Beast King's fur was extremely valuable. It was a rare material that was required to produce equipment with the lightning resistance attribute. The monster's meat was also a must-try delicacy. If cooked properly, it could become a gourmet meal that nobody could resist after a single taste. Just a single piece of the Thunder Beast King's meat could sell for 3 gold. Hence, in the past, many players had tried to grind the Thunder Beast Kings to earn money. However, a player had to be strong enough, as Thunder Beast Kings could rival Tier 3 classes of the same level. Even the weakest Thunder Beast King was a High Lord, while the majority of them were Great Lords. Even a large guild had to pay an unimaginable price if they wanted to kill a field Great Lord, not to mention independent players. Meanwhile, Thunder Crystals were treasures that the Thunder Beast Kings hid within their bodies. However, the drop rate was not 100%. Instant Strike required 100 Thunder Crystals. Even if Shifeng sold off Zero Wing, he could not purchase so many Thunder Crystals. Shifeng was also only level 32 at the moment. He was still a fair distance from reaching level 50. The difficulty of learning Instant Strike could already rival a Tier 3 taboo skill. The skill was definitely at the peak of Tier 2 taboo skills. Am I going to give up like this and complete my quest first? Shifeng muttered, feeling somewhat disappointed. The epic quest Darkness Descends was not easy. It was especially true for the Dark Denver. It was a demon's nest. There would definitely be plenty of extremely powerful monsters waiting for him. If he could learn a taboo skill, it would undeniably increase his chances of completing the epic quest. If he failed the quest, he would have to face the wrath of a Tier 4 Great Demon. With his current combat power, even a Tier 3 demon could kill him easily and take over his body, much less a Tier 4 Great Demon that need only flick its wrist to turn him into ash and dust. When Shifeng reached the final page of the skill book, he discovered that there was a paragraph of text. If skill completion rate reaches 100%, one can call forth heavenly thunder into one's own body 100 times, stimulating the power of the taboo skill without needing the aid of the Thunder Crystal's power. Shit. Skill completion rate of 100%? Are you kidding me? Originally, Shifeng had thought that he still had a trace of hope. After reading the completion rate requirement, however, he nearly spat out a mouthful of blood. Even his past self had never achieved a 100% completion rate on any skill. Rumor had it that only Tier 5 taboo skills required a 100% completion rate. However, how many people in God's domain were actually capable of learning a Tier 5 taboo skill? Forget it. I should just head to the Dark Den for now. For the moment, Shifeng gave up on learning Instant Strike. This Tier 2 taboo skill was most definitely a prank from the Black Wizard Glyn. Shifeng then stored the Instant Strike skill book in his bag. He traveled to the bank and retrieved some tools and magic scrolls before activating the Tier 4 position teleportation scroll, teleporting to the Dark Denver. Suddenly, Shifeng transformed into a streak of white light that pierced the spatial crack that had appeared. As a demon's nest, the Dark Den was a carefully hidden location. Even if the armies of various kingdoms and empires tried to annihilate the demons, they would only find minions. The true great demons nurtured their underlings in their nests in secret. Hence, the various kingdoms and empires throughout the continent of God's domain had been helpless against demons all this time. At this moment, inside a dark cave, a spatial crack suddenly appeared near the cave's ceiling. In the next moment, a streak of light fell through the portal and landed heavily, creating a deep crater. This position teleportation scroll is a huge scam. Shi Feng frowned as he surveyed his surroundings. Shi Feng suddenly realized that he was surrounded by demonkins. The position teleportation scroll had dropped him right in the middle of a demonkin army. Demonkin, common monster. Level 40. HP 10, 000/10, 000. Shi Feng's sudden appearance immediately attracted the attention of many demonkins. The demonkins turned to Shi Feng, one after another, their pitch-black eyes containing endless malice. Their gazes alone were enough to instill terror, not to mention, their violent killing intent also took form, developing into a faint blood mist. Shi Feng had seen this blood mist before. If players were caught within its range, it would significantly dull their five senses. In God's domain, aside from having keen skills, one required powerful five senses to be considered an expert. However, now that Shi Feng was trapped deep within the blood mist, he could no longer rely on his keen senses. Chapter 573, Another World. Such a powerful killing intent. Shi Feng's five senses already felt greatly weakened. Whether it was his vision or intuition, it felt as if a layer of mist shrouded his entire body. He could not see clearly at all. However, compared to the demonkin army before him, what shocked Shi Feng more was the sound of the system notifications reaching his ears. System, player has discovered the Dark Denver. System, all communications with the outside world will be temporarily severed. System, player has been affected by the power of darkness. All attributes decreased by 30%. Line after line of system notifications rang out, leaving Shi Feng utterly speechless. He could still accept his communications being severed, but reducing his attributes by 30% as well? Wasn't this a little too harsh? Originally, the monsters here were of a higher level than him. Moreover, their numbers were also very frightening. Now that he was significantly weakened as well, the difficulty of collecting the Bible of Darkness was undoubtedly considerably higher. Looking at the group of level 40 black-skinned demonkins charging at him like a tidal wave, Shi Feng felt his scalp tingling. Currently he was only level 32. Although the demonkins did not have a level suppression effect on him, with this many of them, even if he possessed large-scale destruction spells, they would not be enough to get him out of this predicament. Having no better option, he turned around and fled to a narrow pathway. Although Shi Feng's attributes had been reduced by 30%, his HP falling from over 10,000 to just over 8,000, and his strength and agility likewise seriously compromised, Shi Feng's equipment was simply too good. Despite his 30% attribute reduction, his speed still greatly surpassed that of the demonkins chasing after him. Very quickly the demonkins on his tail were eating his dust. Seeing a horde of demonkins blocking the entrance to the narrow pathway he was heading for, Shi Feng immediately took out an intermediate frost grenade. Intermediate frost grenade. Effective against monsters and players below level 70. Deals 800 frost damage to a radius of 12 yards, freezing targets for 5 seconds, then reducing movement speed by 60% for a duration of 12 seconds. Each grenade cost 10 silver, enough money to sustain an ordinary player in God's domain for quite some time. To ensure he could complete this epic quest of his and obtain the Bible of Darkness, Shi Feng had been provisioning all this time. Meanwhile, the frost grenades were one of these provisions of his. He had even amassed plenty of advanced frost grenades, which cost 70 silver each. The number of demonkins before him was simply too frightening. This was no longer a problem he could solve by relying on technique. He could only use absolute power to break through. Hence, this was the best time to employ the frost grenades. Tossing out one intermediate frost grenade. A large patch of demonkins was instantly frozen solid, damage of -800 emerging above their heads. A large ice flower suddenly bloomed within the originally pitch-black area. Inside this dark cave, this ice flower looked extraordinarily beautiful and holy. Another dozen or so intermediate frost grenades followed in rapid succession. Flowers of ice bloomed one after another, and in the blink of an eye, practically all the demonkins in Shi Feng's way were frozen. As for the few demonkins that remained unscathed, they were no threat to Shi Feng whatsoever. After a few evasive maneuvers, he was already past the demonkins' blockade. He then leaped into the narrow pathway. However, the instant Shi Feng set foot in the narrow pathway, he suddenly felt death looming over him. He hurriedly activated the aura of Earth's activatable skill, Absolute Defense, becoming immune to all damage for 5 seconds. This could be considered Shifeng's most powerful life-saving skill. The instant the divine golden aura wrapped around Shifeng's body, a clangor resounded throughout the cave. Countless black threads had struck at Shifeng's body. These black threads were extremely thin. In the darkness of the cave, they were practically invisible to the naked eye. If Shifeng's intuition had not warned him of imminent death, these countless black threads might have devoured him already. It's actually a trap. This dark den really isn't giving me any chances. Shifeng felt his heart tremble momentarily when he turned back to glance at the tide of demonkins that had been chasing him just now. Any demonkin struck by the black threads immediately exploded into a cloud of black mist, becoming deader than dead. If he had been slower by even a heartbeat back then, he might very well have become one of those clouds of black mist right about now. With the black threads having passed him already, Shifeng quickly continued running forward. At this moment he had absolute defense activated. Nothing was capable of inflicting damage on him. In other words, he had no need to fear any traps right now. Naturally, he had to put absolute defense's duration to good use. Moreover, in God's domain, the more dangerous a location was, the more profitable it was. Any place filled with plenty of traps definitely hid treasures. The presence of traps in this pathway meant that this path was not a dead end, which gave Shifeng even more reason to advance through it. During absolute defense's duration of 5 seconds, with even Windwalker activated, Shifeng triggered a total of 4 traps. However, absolute defense blocked them all. That was close. Fortunately, I have the 7 Luminaries ring. Otherwise, I wouldn't even make it past the front door. Shifeng halted his steps, breathing out a sigh of relief as he looked at the demonkins chasing after him. After receiving the attacks of multiple traps, the number of demonkins still alive numbered less than 100. Moreover, now that absolute defense's duration had run out, only death awaited him if he advanced rashly. Hence, he might as well deal with these demonkins in the meantime. Swinging the abyssal blade, Shifeng activated Skywheel Sword. Countless divine swords descended from above, immediately trapping these demonkins within the cramped space. Meanwhile, damages of over -3,000 and -6,000 points appeared over every demonkin's head. Right after that, Shifeng switched out the aura of earth for the aura of fire, then promptly cast Firestorm on these demonkins. A moment later, silence filled the poorly illuminated cave. Simultaneously, Shifeng's EXP soared. There was a difference of 8 levels between Shifeng and the demonkins. Even if the demonkins were just common monsters, the total EXP they gave was still plenty. However, at the end of the day, common monsters were still common monsters. They had dropped practically nothing at all. Following which, Shifeng patiently waited for absolute defense's cooldown to end before advancing down the pathway once more. By repeatedly running and stopping, Shifeng triggered an unknown number of traps before finally arriving at the exit of the narrow pathway. The instant he stepped out of the pathway, his eyes suddenly flinched. Why is there sunlight here? Shifeng wondered, unable to contain his surprise. His eyes had already adapted to the darkness of the cave. Now that he suddenly emerged into bright light, his eyes failed to adjust to the abrupt change, causing his vision to go bleary. Only after Shifeng had fully recovered did he begin surveying his surroundings. Tall mountains and flowing water. White clouds dotting the sky. Lush green forest that covered everything. How was this place a demon's abode? Even paradise paled in comparison to this place. What sort of situation is this? Shifeng turned around to look at the cave behind him. A layer of black film covered the cave entrance, and he could not see anything inside the cave at all, similar to how he had been unable to see anything outside the cave before. Did I exit from the dark den? No, that's not right. The system has not notified me that I have left the dark Denver. Moreover, my communication system hasn't recovered yet, proving that I have not left the dark den, and am in fact still inside the dark Denver. Shifeng shook his head. He had little to no understanding of the dark Denver. All he knew was that Fantasy Extinguisher had completed this quest in the past and had brought immeasurable improvements to his guild. Fantasy Extinguisher had never mentioned anything about the dark den itself to outsiders, so Shifeng naturally remained ignorant. Just as Shifeng was sitting quietly by the cliff outside the cave, the sound of an explosion came from below the cliff. This should be an elementalist's flame spell, Flame Dragon's Roar, right? Shifeng looked at the massive flame dragon soaring up from below the cliff. Unable to help his surprise, he muttered, "Is there an elementalist battling down below?" Chapter 574, Curse. The battle below the cliff grew in intensity as more time passed. Aside from the booming of violent elemental mana, there were also thundering roars and the constant clash of metal reverberating in the canyon. That's one intense battle. Seeing the trees being shattered and felled one after another, Shifeng could not help but take a closer look at the ongoing battle. In the forested canyon, Shifeng could see a massive shadow moving through the trees. This shadow left a trail of destruction everywhere it passed. Such a powerful monster. Judging from its strength, which allows it to sweep away all obstacles in its path, it should not be any weaker than a chieftain. Shifeng then jumped off the cliff to take a closer look at the situation below. He had come to the dark den to complete his epic quest. This sudden battle before him might very well have some relation to the quest. Naturally, he had to go check it out. If an ordinary player were to jump down from a cliff that was over 100 meters tall, they would die the instant they landed. However, Shifeng did not mind. When he was about 20 meters above the ground, he activated gravity liberation, his body suddenly becoming as light as a feather. Due to the immense air resistance, Shifeng's descent decelerated sharply, so he landed safely. The instant Shifeng's feet touched the green grass, he activated omniscient eyes, allowing him to perceive every movement within a radius of 100 yards. With this, he would be able to react immediately at the first sign of danger. This was a habit he had picked up from his many years of adventuring. When dealing with the unknown, caution had the top priority. Moreover, he was currently in the dark den, a nest of demons. He needed to be even more cautious. Meanwhile, the battle happening a distance away continued to intensify, so much so that even the ground was shaking right now. When Shifeng arrived at the battlefield, he discovered a giant black serpent over 50 meters in length swinging its tail around. With a single sweep, the serpent easily sliced apart a tree over 1 meter in diameter, leaving the surface of the cut as smooth as a mirror. With another casual swipe of its tail, the serpent split the ground, opening a deep gorge. Every one of the serpent's actions was capable of causing massive changes to its surroundings. Dark Magic Serpent, Dark Creature, Chieftain Rank. Level 42. HP 800, 000/800, 000. Meanwhile, fighting against the Dark Magic Serpent was a party of 6 players. Moreover, the players in this party were extremely powerful, with the average level of the party being level 29. Even in Zero Wing, only Blackie had reached this level. A level 29 shield warrior currently stood at the forefront, fending off the serpent's attacks, while 2 mages and a ranger bombarded the chieftain with a relentless stream of attacks. A druid and a cleric standing at the rear line were also continuously healing the shield warrior. For a time, the battle remained at a stalemate. Iron Wrist, be careful. It's using vicious venom. Hurriedly reminded the ranger standing at the rear line when he saw the serpent's belly expanding. Relax. The shield warrior named Iron Wrist laughed, and instead of preparing to dodge, he took the initiative to charge at the Dark Magic Serpent. The Dark Magic Serpent opened its mouth and began spewing black mist into its surroundings. All vegetation that came into contact with this black mist immediately withered and turned into ash. In the next moment, the shield warrior rushing forward used shield bash on the serpent's abdomen, interrupting its skill and putting an end to the stream of black mist coming out of the monster's mouth. The black mist surrounding the chieftain began thinning out right away. However, the shield warrior was also poisoned as a result of his frontal assault, the skin all over his body turning pitch black. His HP started decreasing rapidly, losing 3,000 HP with each passing second. In the blink of an eye, the shield warrior's HP hit a critical level. Fortunately, the cleric of the party had long since been prepared for this situation. He quickly cast Detoxify on his companion, cleansing the serpent's venom just as it was about to deal damage for the 3rd time. Meanwhile, the druid beside the cleric had also promptly cast Life Restoration, healing the shield warrior for over 2,000 HP, followed by a hot effect that recovered more than 300 HP every second, pulling the shield warrior out of death's grip. Meanwhile, angered at the interruption of its skill, the Dark Magic Serpent swept its tail at the shield warrior. At this time, a golden arrow shot towards the serpent's tail. The instant the golden arrow collided with the serpent's tail, it transformed into numerous chains that tied the serpent to the ground. However, the Dark Magic Serpent's strength was too powerful. In the blink of an eye, it shattered the chains binding it and resumed its attack on the shield warrior. At this moment, the elementalist of the party used Ice Wall, creating a wall of ice between the serpent's tail and the shield warrior. When the serpent's tail collided with the ice wall, its speed fell drastically. As a result, the shield warrior managed to dodge the chieftain's attack effortlessly. The entire process was like flowing water. The members of the party were perfectly attuned to one another. Despite the dark magic serpent having the advantage in levels, this party of 6 was toying with it. Such amazing coordination, Shifeng could not help but praise. Just who are these people? The dark magic serpent was a level 42 chieftain. Even a guild's elite team would do their best to avoid such a monster. Yet, right now, a party of independent players was fighting it handily. However, the thing that shocked Shifeng the most right now was the fact that there were actually other players in the Dark Den as well. The Dark Den was very mysterious and well hidden. He had arrived in this place only after using a Tier 4 magic scroll. Meanwhile, these players before him had actually managed to find their way here. It was simply inconceivable. At this moment, Shifeng could not help but wish he could rush forward and question these people right away. If they truly had some other method to get to this place, he could then bring some helpers to help him complete his epic quest. That way his chances of success would be even higher. However, he suppressed this urge of his. Instead, he remained hidden in the forest as he quietly observed this party of players. There were many incidents of players plundering other players in God's domain. Currently, this party was still in the thick of battle against the dark magic serpent. His making an appearance right now without any warning was highly likely to lead to misunderstandings. At that time, how was he supposed to get the secret of coming to this place out of them? Time passed little by little. The dark magic serpent's HP continuously decreased, and soon enough, its HP fell to 30%. SSSS. The dark magic serpent suddenly hissed loudly, its entire body exuding black mist. Very quickly, this mist then wrapped around the chieftain's body and transformed into pitch-black scales. Under the bright sunshine, the scales released a blinding black light. Chieftain-ranked monsters normally entered a berserk state when their HP fell below a certain level. Currently, the dark magic serpent's HP had dropped to 30%, which just so happened to trigger the condition for going berserk. After the pitch-black scales were fully formed, the dark magic serpent was like an iron serpent. Not only had its defense and magic resistance improved significantly, but even its strength had also increased by at least 30%. Right now its every attack shook the earth. However, the party of 6 had long since been prepared for this situation. The cursemancer of the party immediately began tracing a large number of runes in the air, while chanting verse after verse of incantations. The density of the surrounding elemental mana had also started rising sharply. Amazing. That cursemancer has actually learned the Tier 1 curse skill, Dark Storm. Shifeng could not help his surprise when he saw the runes drawn out by that cursemancer. It's no wonder they dared to challenge a level 42 chieftain. In God's domain, physical taboo skills and magical curses were both skills that allowed players to combat enemies of a higher tier. However, curses were much harder to learn compared to taboo skills, since curses were much more powerful. The instant the cursemancer was done chanting the final verse of his incantation, the space surrounding the battlefield suddenly went silent as countless black blades of wind appeared surrounding the dark magic serpent. These wind blades easily pierced through the sturdy scales of the dark magic serpent. A continuous stream of black wind blades assaulted the chieftain for 3 full seconds. The dark magic serpent lost over 8,000 HP every second, losing over 20,000 HP after 3 seconds passed. Moreover, aside from these damages, the scales covering the chieftain's body had also disappeared completely, returning it to its original form. Okay, let's finish it off. The shield warrior, Iron Wrist, immediately sent a slash at the serpent. However, before this party could celebrate, a loud hiss suddenly came from the woods. SSSS. At this moment, another dark magic serpent emerged from the dense forest. Chapter 575, 24 Consecutive Strikes. Damn, it actually called a companion. Iron Wrist frowned. The other party members also grew anxious at the arrival of another dark magic serpent. Facing one was already their limit. Moreover, their only curse was on cooldown, and it would be quite some time before they could use it again. Iron Wrist, what are we going to do now? The cleric at the rear line asked hurriedly. Iron Wrist looked at the dark magic serpent that they had injured heavily, before turning to look at the newly arrived chieftain that was rapidly slithering towards them. Gritting his teeth, he said, "Let's retreat." Although the heavily injured dark magic serpent only had 30% of its HP remaining, they would still need quite some time to kill it. Meanwhile, the dark magic serpent was unlike other chieftains. It was a chieftain that possessed a potent venom. When fighting against a dark magic serpent, if one failed to interrupt the chieftain's vicious venom skill in time, even a team of 100 players would die. If their party was fighting just one of these serpents, they could still manage to interrupt its skill. However, going up against two at the same time was impossible since their party did not have a second person capable of interrupting the other dark magic serpent's vicious venom. As long as the venomous mist of the skill spreads, only death awaited them. Hence, their only option right now was to retreat. When the others heard Iron Wrist's command, they immediately withdrew without hesitation. Unfortunately, although Iron Wrist and the others had made the correct decision in this situation, the heavily injured dark magic serpent had no intentions of letting them go. Widening its mouth, it shot jets of venom at Iron Wrist and his team. A short moment later, the other dark magic serpent caught up with the party, circled around to their rear, and used its tail swipe skill at the party's cleric and druid. Damn. Iron Wrist's complexion sank. Although he wanted to go save the two healers, the distance to them prevented him from doing so. Moreover, the dark magic serpent in front of him was also bombarding him with venom attacks. Not to mention saving others, he was having a tough time just trying to avoid being hit himself. "Leave us," the cleric named Off Fire shouted. He could not help squeezing his eyes shut when he saw the serpent's tail swiping at him. Against a level 42 chieftain like the dark magic serpent, even their party shield warrior, Iron Wrist, could only survive 2 direct hits. As for cloth armor classes like them, the chieftain would need only 1 hit to end their lives. Boom. The earth shattered. Why am I still alive? Despite waiting for a long time, Off Fire did not feel any pain from the impact of the serpent's tail. He then cracked open his eyes, taking a peek at the dark magic serpent. Immediately, a dumbfounded expression appeared on his face. How is this possible? At this moment, whether it was Off Fire or his fellow party members, all of them had their mouths hanging wide open. Standing before Off Fire right now was a person. Meanwhile, this person had actually blocked the dark magic serpent's attack using just one hand without so much as taking half a step back. Only, due to the immense force contained within the serpent's tail, the ground beneath this person's feet had shattered. A player had actually managed to overwhelm a level 42 chieftain. This scene was as if someone had stopped a moving truck using a single hand. How could it not be shocking? However, what the party of 6 did not know was that the reason Shifeng was able to block a level 42 chieftain's attack with just a single hand was entirely due to his activation of Heavenly Dragon's power, which doubled his strength. Otherwise, even Shifeng, with his exaggerated attributes, would not be able to receive the dark magic serpent's attack safely. "You guys deal with the injured dark magic serpent. Leave this one to me," Shifeng said directly. In response, Off Fire and the others absent-mindedly nodded their heads. It was as if Shifeng was currently their party's leader. After saying so, Shifeng immediately jumped up to the space above the serpent's head. Raising the abyssal blade, he activated Thunder Flame Explosion. The power of lightning wrapped around the abyssal blade as the magic weapon landed on the dark magic serpent's head. Boom. Lightning and flames instantly washed over the dark magic serpent. Even though the chieftain possessed very high defense and magic resistance, it still suffered over -6,000 damage from the attack. Who is this person? Is it really possible for a player to be that strong? Off Fire's jaw fell when he saw the damage Shifeng had dealt. Their party could be considered a top-tier party already. Yet, the highest damage their party could deal a dark magic serpent in a single instance was just slightly over -1,000. Meanwhile, Shifeng had managed to deal over -6,000 damage in just a single attack. His damage output alone was already more than double that of their entire party. The dark magic serpent constantly let out anguished cries as it was bathed in the power of lightning and fire. It glared at Shifeng with its chilling eyes. However, although it wished to devour Shifeng, it was powerless to do so. Other than dealing massive amounts of damage, the Tier 1 Thunder Flame Explosion also had a fainted and speed reduction effect. Although the fainted effect was not particularly effective against the dark magic serpent, the speed reduction effect was highly effective. The serpent's movement speed and attack speed instantly fell to only 1/6 of its original, its movements becoming extremely sluggish. Only when Shifeng had already landed back on the ground, did the dark magic serpent's jaw, that was capable of swallowing a small car whole, begin descending towards Shifeng. Smiling, Shifeng shifted his footwork slightly, easily dodging the dark magic serpent's attempt to devour him. Turning his body, he followed up with a slash to the chieftain's mouth. The instant he struck the serpent, it went flying, and its head smashed heavily into a tree. As the tree swayed wildly, damage of over -2,000 points appeared above the serpent's head. Such a high defense. It's even higher than an ordinary lord's. Just what kind of monster is this? Shifeng clicked his tongue slightly. He had activated not only Dragon's power but also the aura of fire, which increased his damage by 40%. With his current equipment and attributes, his normal attacks should still be able to deal over -3,000 damage, even if he was up against a level 40 lord. However, when it came to the dark magic serpent, his attack only dealt more than -2,000 damage. To the level 42 chieftain, which possessed 800,000 HP, that amount of damage was practically negligible. Just its battle recovery alone could regenerate 1% of its HP every 5 seconds. That was 8,000 HP every 5 seconds. Should he encounter this dark magic serpent without Dragon's power, he would most likely have no choice but to flee. On the other side, Iron Wrist and the others had begun luring the heavily injured dark magic serpent away from Shifeng. If the two dark magic serpents used vicious venom simultaneously, even a 1,000-strong army would have to say their prayers. Seeing that Iron Wrist and the others had distanced themselves from him, Shifeng now activated 9 Dragon Slash and Phantom Kill. At the same time, he had also had his doppelganger activate its ultimate move, Blade Liberation, increasing its strength and agility by 80%. With two of them attacking the chieftain together, the battle became much more efficient. Although the doppelganger's strength was not comparable to the original, it surpassed Shifeng in terms of speed. Taking hold of the dark magic serpent's aggro, the doppelganger kited the chieftain effortlessly. Meanwhile, Shifeng himself attacked the chieftain madly from behind. Chop. Thundering Flash. Earth Splitter. Finally, both original and doppelganger used Flame Burst simultaneously. Every single one of their attacks dealt over -10,000 damage and over -20,000 damage if their attacks triggered a critical hit. Out of the 24 consecutive hits, over half achieved a critical hit. In the blink of an eye, the dark magic serpent's remaining 50% HP zeroed out. The chieftain did not even get the chance to use Berserk. The dark magic serpent's death also allowed Shifeng's EXP to soar. In addition to the difference of 10 levels, the EXP a field chieftain provided was also very generous. Aside from contributing a huge sum of EXP, the dark magic serpent dropped 7 items. Only 7 items dropped even after I activated Divine Providence? Isn't this dark magic serpent a little too miserly? Shifeng was stunned when he saw only 7 items scattered on the ground. Chapter 576, Maverick. In God's domain, a chieftain-ranked monster normally dropped around 4 or 5 items since a 20-man team could easily deal with a chieftain of the same level. As for lords, these monsters usually required 50-man or 100-man teams of the same level to defeat, and the number of items they usually dropped was above 10 pieces. At Dark Gold rank, Icarus's heart possessed 14 luck. Moreover, Divine Providence gave an additional 32 luck when activated. In total, Shifeng could raise his luck up to 46 points. With so much luck, Shifeng had a high chance of triggering a jackpot even if he were to kill a lord, not to mention a chieftain. Yet, the dark magic serpent had only dropped 7 items. Moreover, all 7 of these items were very ordinary. Usually, players would have a tiny chance of obtaining fine gold equipment from field chieftains. However, among the 7 items Shifeng obtained, there was no fine gold equipment at all. There were only 2 pieces of mysterious iron equipment and 2 pieces of secret silver equipment. All 4 were level 40 equipment. As for the remaining drops, they were 3 gray crystals. Taking a look at the crystals, information showed that all 3 were common items. What is going on here? Shifeng was astonished when he saw the items the dark magic serpent dropped. Despite his having such high luck, the chieftain dropped only such low-quality items. It was practically the lowest possible drop one could get from a chieftain. Shifeng then shook his head, dispelling his thoughts as he quickly stored the drops. Whatever. Best to take a look at the situation on other side for now. Although the drops he obtained were unsightly, Shifeng felt that it was somewhat reasonable after giving the matter some thought. The higher the level one reached in God's domain, the more difficult it was to obtain good equipment. When players reached level 40, the difficulty of obtaining level 40 secret silver equipment was no less than the difficulty of obtaining level 30 fine gold equipment at level 30. While Sure Feng was hurrying over to Iron Wrist's side of the battlefield, the fight there had yet to end. Currently, the Dark Magic Serpent still had 10% of its HP remaining. However, Iron Wrist and the others were not doing too well right now. Due to the unexpected ambush earlier, the party's mages and healers had depleted themselves considerably. Now that they resumed their conquest of the heavily injured Dark Magic Serpent, they found the battle extremely taxing. Hence, even after fighting for so long, they had managed to take away only 20% of the Dark Magic Serpent's HP. Everyone keep it up. It has only 10% of its HP left. We should hurry up and finish off this Dark Magic Serpent so that we can go help on the other side. Iron Wrist said as he blocked the chieftain's tail swipe using his shield. Everyone nodded in agreement, and they began using everything they had. The two mages each took out a Tier 1 magic scroll and started chanting. Tier 1 magic scrolls were life-saving items. Although the scrolls only contained Tier 1 skills, the might of the skills was much more than that of any ordinary Tier 1 skill. Most importantly, these Tier 1 magic scrolls did not require any mana to use. The ranger had also taken out 20 special arrows. These special arrows were consumable items. Although they were not as expensive as a Tier 1 magic scroll, the combined value of 20 special arrows was no less than that of 3 Tier 1 magic scrolls. The spells contained in the Tier 1 magic scrolls bombarded the Dark Magic Serpent one after another, each dealing over -3,000 or -4,000 damage, 3 or 4 times more damage than what the mage's own Tier 1 spells were capable of. The two mages' bombardment instantly reaped over 20,000 HP from the chieftain. Meanwhile, every one of the special arrows the ranger shot dealt around -1,500 damage to the serpent. After firing all 20 arrows, the ranger inflicted a total of -30,000 plus damage to the chieftain. In the blink of an eye, the Dark Magic Serpent's HP fell to a critical level. The chieftain constantly let out anguished shrieks as the spells and arrows visited numerous terrible wounds on its body. Die! Iron Wrist shouted as he used Beheaded. The Tier 1 Beheaded could instantly kill a monster with less than 5% HP remaining at a certain probability. Iron Wrist immediately slashed his saber down on the serpent's head, dealing nearly -30,000 damage to the chieftain and instantly killing it. SSS. The Dark Magic Serpent hissed one last time before its body fell to the ground. Phew, our win this time sure didn't come easy. I wonder if it dropped? The cleric, off fire, said as he breathed out a sigh of relief, his hand wiping away the sweat that had gathered on his forehead. We don't have time to care about these things. Dustwind, you stay behind and pick up the loot, Iron Wrist instructed the elementalist beside him. Everyone else follow me. Don't forget, we still have another full HP Dark Magic Serpent we need to take care of. Without anybody to detoxify him, that person won't be able to last too long. Although they had seen how powerful Sure Feng was, the Dark Magic Serpent was no ordinary monster. Particularly, without a cleric to deal with the chieftain's vicious venom, it was simply impossible for someone to defeat a Dark Magic Chieftain all alone. When everyone heard Iron Wrist's words, they immediately readjusted their moods and promptly broke out into a run toward Sure Feng's side of the battlefield. However, before they managed to take 2 steps, they stopped cold. Everyone was stupefied. A person had suddenly walked out of the forest in front of them, and this person was none other than Sure Feng, the person they were just about to go save. Moreover, Sure Feng appeared completely unscathed. He had not lost even a single HP. There was also no sign of a Dark Magic Serpent behind him, proving that he had not escaped his battle but had instead finished it already. The Dark Magic Serpent had an extensive hunting range. As long as one remained within this region, the Dark Magic Serpent would not give up on its pursuit. In other words, Sure Feng had single-handedly defeated a full HP Dark Magic Serpent. Moreover, he had killed it much faster than they had. The difference in strength between them was simply unimaginable. Is he a monster? Off-Fire's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked at Sure Feng walking over slowly. Even our District 5's #1 expert, Punishment Day, isn't capable of such a feat, right? That person is definitely a Maverick, a solo expert standing at the peak of all great experts. Once we return, we can go boast to those in the 6th party. Dustwind, the level 28 elementalist, exclaimed, his gaze filled with reverence as he looked at Sure Feng. Alright, enough fooling around. Stay serious. That person is our 7th party's savior, Iron Wrist said. In fact, just like his companions, Iron Wrist, too, was inwardly shocked by Shifeng. It was definitely an honor to be able to become acquainted with such a solo expert out in the fields. While Iron Wrist and the others were happily chatting together, Shifeng, who had overheard their conversation, grew confused. District 5. This was the first time Shifeng had heard this term. In addition, Maverick? Did these people not see the guild emblem on his chest? Moreover, looking at the reverence in their eyes, it seemed that what they revered was not his strength, but more of the fact that he was a Maverick instead. That's right, we're the 7th party of District 5, and I am the party leader of the 7th party, Iron Wrist. We are truly grateful for your help before, Sir Expert. Otherwise, our party would have truly been finished, Iron Wrist said gratefully. Hearing Iron Wrist's words, Shifeng grew even more confused. May I ask if this place is the Dark Den? Shifeng asked. Dark Den? I've never heard of such a place. Our party only operates in areas close to District 5. We've never ventured anywhere too far. I sincerely apologize for not being able to offer any help, Iron Wrist replied after giving Shifeng's question some thought. However, the other parties in District 5 might know something about it. After all, the area our 7th party has explored is somewhat smaller than what the others have. Why don't you follow us back to District 5? I can help you ask around the other parties. Alright, I'll have to trouble you then, Shifeng agreed after thinking it over. Shifeng could tell that Iron Wrist had not lied. However, the Shield Warrior's words left him thoroughly muddle-headed. He might as well go to this District 5 and take a look around. Meanwhile, when Iron Wrist's party heard Shifeng agree to accompany them back to District 5, they all showed excited expressions. Chapter 577, Chapter of Darkness. While Shifeng was patiently waiting for Iron Wrist's party to collect their loot, he suddenly discovered an astonishing matter. The loot of the dark magic serpent had exceeded his expectations entirely. The serpent Iron Wrist and his party killed had dropped only 3 items, with 2 of them being level 40 mysterious iron equipment. The 3rd item was a piece of gray crystal. Aside from those, there was nothing else. Their loot was miles short of the 7 items he had gotten. It seems that the loot of the dark magic serpent really is terrible. When Shifeng looked at the drops Iron Wrist's party obtained, he realized that his luck before hadn't been bad at all. Just as Shifeng was about to lament the paucity of the dark magic serpent's loot, Dustwind, the elementalist of the party, suddenly jumped up in joy. We've lucked out. It actually dropped. Dustwind laughed. Really? Let me see. Off-Fire rushed to the elementalist, the expression on his face right now as if he had just won the lottery. We've only been hunting dark magic serpents for 4 days, yet we've already managed to obtain it? That can't be right? Likewise, everyone else in the party ran over to the elementalist, one after another, excited expressions on their faces. Shifeng could not help but be stunned at this sight. He had long since peeked at the party's loot using omniscient eyes. Although level 40 mysterious iron equipment was indeed a rare item right now, it was still useless to current players. Moreover, its basic attributes were only slightly better than level 30 fine gold equipment. With the strength of Iron Wrist's party, would level 40 mysterious iron equipment be able to even enter their eyes by the time they reached level 40? Was there a need to get this excited? Wah! Leader, it really dropped. We've hit the jackpot this time. Off-Fire said as he showed off the gray crystal in his hand to Iron Wrist. After Iron Wrist accepted the gray crystal, he took a look at it before gritting his teeth and passing it to Shifeng, saying, Brother Expert, you saved our 7th party. We don't really have anything we can offer to you in gratitude, so please accept this soul crystal on our behalf. This? Shifeng was stunned momentarily. He then said, instead of giving me this item, I hope that Brother Iron Wrist can help me ask around on some matters. You can take this item as remuneration for your efforts. This won't do. The value of a single soul crystal far surpasses the price required for us to ask around for information. Iron Wrist refused. He then pondered slightly before continuing, why don't I use gemstones of equal value to trade for it? Gemstones were not foreign to players of God's domain. One could say that they were one of the hard currencies of God's domain. They could be inlaid into equipment to improve said equipment's attributes. However, during the initial stages of God's domain, gemstones were extremely rare. Hence, the prices for these items were also very high. Currently, a single Tier 1 gemstone which was capable of increasing a single attribute by 3 points, cost around 10 silver. As for Tier 2 gemstones capable of increasing a single attribute by 6 points, they cost around 90 silver. Among the variety of Tier 2 gemstones, the ones that increase strength, agility, or intelligence could sell for up to 1 gold. To current players, the best gemstones obtainable right now were Tier 2 gemstones. Sure, Shifeng agreed. Great. Our party has a total of 23 Tier 2 gemstones and 89 Tier 1 gemstones. However, we don't have too many on hand right now, most of them are in our warehouses. Can I pass you the remaining ones after we return to the district? Iron Wrist asked, somewhat embarrassed. Shifeng was greatly shocked by the Shield Warrior's offer. If he sold all these gemstones he could get roughly 30 gold in total. Moreover, that 30 gold was only part of the soul crystal's actual value. Since Shifeng had already promised to exchange it, he naturally would not regret his decision. Hence, he promptly accepted all the gemstones Iron Wrist currently had on him. Shifeng could tell how desperate Iron Wrist and his party members were for the gray crystal. Moreover, it seemed that they had come here solely to farm for the soul crystal. In any case, Shifeng had no use for this item right now. He also had another 3 crystals sitting inside his bag. If he really needed more in the future he could simply come and kill more dark magic serpents. With divine providence he could easily obtain plenty of soul crystals. Following which, Shifeng accompanied Iron Wrist and the others back to District 5. To put it simply, District 5 was an area enclosed within a gigantic magic array. There was a small town inside this area, and the number of players residing within this town was relatively low. Although there were not many players here, the players had very high levels. Every one of them was level 26 or above. They were higher leveled than even the elite players of guilds. Moreover, the equipment these players wore were of very high quality, with the weakest being mysterious iron equipment, and the majority being secret silver equipment. Only the elite members of Zero Wing could possibly compare to these ordinary players. Why aren't there any NPCs guards here? Shifeng could not help but ask. After surveying the streets for a while, he had not seen any NPC guards whatsoever. NPC guards were normally used to maintain town security and to prevent fights between players. Not having any NPC guards was not good news to ordinary players. NPC guards? What's that? Iron Wrist asked curiously. They're NPCs meant to maintain the security of the town and prevent players from trying to kill each other, Shifeng replied, surprised. District 5 doesn't have such NPCs as we're inside a safe zone. Within the safe zone, no player can attack anyone. Hence, town security is very high. Moreover, our District 5 is very powerful. We've accumulated enough soul crystals to even establish a new training facility already. On the other hand, Districts 6 and 7 are only able to defend themselves against monster assaults, Iron Wrist proudly explained. I see. Shifeng nodded. He more or less understood what was going on now. God's Domain was an extremely mysterious game. The main god system was also constantly expanding God's Domain itself. Depending on the region a player resided in, the gameplay they experienced would indeed be somewhat different. Shifeng had encountered such situations a few times in the past. Only he had not expected the gameplay here to be this different from where he came from. It felt as if the players here were playing a city-building game, protecting and developing the cities they belonged to. This was just like how a guild would establish their own town or city. However, there was yet to be a single guild capable of constructing their own city. Soon, Iron Wrist and his party set out to help Shifeng gather information related to the Dark Denver. Meanwhile, Shifeng himself went to a bar to collect information about this place. Did you hear? Our few districts have recently joined forces and are preparing to go on a crusade against Gloomy Valley. The Crusading army is currently recruiting members as well. As long as we can get rid of the Great Lord Noya inside Gloomy Valley, we will be able to open up new maps, a guardian knight inside the bar said to his companions after taking a sip of red wine. I heard that the top 10 parties of our District 5 can join the Crusading army directly. Unfortunately, my party is ranked more than 50, and we'll have to pass a test if we want to join the coalition, an assassin said with disappointment. That's right. As long as we can defeat the Great Lord, we will be able to obtain the Chapter of Darkness. At which point, the monster assaults will become much easier to handle. For a time, everyone inside the bar discussed matters related to Gloomy Valley. Chapter of Darkness? Shi Feng suddenly thought about the Bible of Darkness when he heard about the chapter of darkness. Is there some sort of connection between the two? His quest required him to obtain the Bible of Darkness. However, he had no clue as to how he should go about doing so. Meanwhile, the chapter of darkness could possibly be an important clue. It seems that I'll have to make a trip to Gloomy Valley myself, Shi Feng quietly muttered. Chapter 578, District 5. Time passed little by little. Before he knew it, Shi Feng had spent over an hour inside the bar already. Although he had not done anything in particular, he had gained an enormous harvest. The bar was somewhere players often conversed and exchanged information with each other, so collecting information was effortless, particularly information regarding District 5. After going through the information he had, Shi Feng finally understood what kind of place District 5 was. He could not help but admit that it was similar to the real world. To put it simply, District 5 was a simple shelter that allowed players to stay at a close distance to high-leveled monsters, removing the need to waste large amounts of time on travel. As there were no teleportation arrays here, players had to rely on their own 2 feet to get anywhere. Due to the large number of ferocious monsters in the area, players would generally form parties when venturing into the fields, not daring to go solo. Any player capable of moving solo in the fields was an expert among experts. These solo players were known as Mavericks, and they were the definition of strength. Hence, they were admired by many players. Besides that, shelters also served as a defensive measure against monster assaults because the nights in this place was extremely terrifying. How terrifying were they? At night time, monsters would group up and actively assault players. Even a 100-man team would not survive without the protection of the shelter. Moreover, even if players were inside the shelter, they still needed to face the tsunami of monsters. Hence, the players here had no choice but to work together to fend off these monsters. If the shelter were compromised, then the activity range of players would be similarly affected. They would have no choice but to move their base of operations to a lower-level region. In the future, if they wished to grind high-level monsters, they would have to waste a lot of time traveling from a low-level region to a high-level region. Meanwhile, the nights here were longer than days. Out of the 48 hours in each day, 30 hours consisted of nighttime with only 18 hours of daytime. The time available for players to level up and improve themselves was much more limited. This situation further emphasized the importance of shelters. After all, if players were to waste 8 to 9 hours on travel every day, how were they supposed to level up? Nevertheless, it was this dire situation that allowed the players here to have very high levels. District 5 was one of the shelters located in a high-level region. The players here did not have to waste a large amount of time on travel to encounter high-level monsters, go to high-level dungeons, or take on high-level quests. As the players here had to face the assault of a monster army every night, not only could they gain a considerable amount of EXP from killing these monsters, but they could also take the opportunity to complete high-level quests, obtaining significant sums of money and equipment. Meanwhile, the most precious resource for a shelter was the Soul Crystal. This item could be used to strengthen the magic array enveloping the shelter, significantly weakening the monsters within the magic array's range and giving players an easier time pushing back the monster armies. If players donated soul crystals to the shelter, they could receive large amounts of contribution shares in return. Contribution shares were equivalent to money in shelters, and players could use these points to purchase some specific items to strengthen themselves. For example, the Tier 1 curse that Ironwrist's party wielded was one of the good items acquired using contribution shares. Hence, the players here had a great desire for soul crystals. Only this item was truly useless to Shi Feng. He would not be living in this place. He was only going to stay here as a guest until he completed his quest. Although the soul crystals are useless to me, it won't be a bad idea to exchange them for some gemstones. Shi Feng suddenly thought of a good idea to make money as he looked at the 3 soul crystals inside his bag. Compared to the outside world, gemstones were much more easily obtained in this place. During the monster attacks at night, there was no lack of chieftain and lord-ranked monsters. Chieftains had a high chance of dropping Tier 1 gemstones, while lords might even drop Tier 2 gemstones. Hence, the supply of gemstones here was much higher. In the outside world, players very rarely had the chance to inlay gemstones into their equipment. In here, however, it was very normal for players to have all the equipment on their bodies inlaid with gemstones. As a result, the basic attributes of the players here were much higher than those of players in the outside world. Meanwhile, the prices of gemstones here were also much cheaper. Outside, each Tier 1 gemstone sold for 10 silver, whereas Tier 2 gemstones sold for 90 silver to 1 gold per piece. In here, however, 5 silver could buy a Tier 1 gemstone, whereas Tier 2 gemstones only cost around 40 silver. As for soul crystals, each piece could sell for up to 40 gold. Even then, players would still fight to buy it. The drop rate of soul crystals was abysmally low, and only chieftains that were level 40 or above had a slightly higher drop rate. This was also the reason why Iron Wrist's party had gone hunting for chieftains over level 40. By the time Shifeng was done compiling the information he had gathered, Iron Wrist had also entered the bar together with a silver-armored guardian knight. The instant this bearded man with thick eyelashes entered, the bar fell silent. Every player inside the bar immediately turned to look at this guardian knight one after another. What's the party leader of the third party, Discipline Paradise, doing here? Is Discipline Paradise here to recruit members? How could it be? That's the third party of our District 5. Even if he were recruiting more members, he would choose from their list of available candidates first. Why would he come to a bar looking for members? I heard that the 6 official members of the third party have all learned Tier 1 curses and taboo skills. They can go out to grind without fear even during the night. That's right. The third party's strength is currently the closest to the first party. It is highly possible that, after the next ranking battle, Discipline Paradise will become the leader of the second party. Everyone inside the bar looked at the silver-armored knight with gazes of admiration and reverence. In a shelter, the higher ranked a party was, the more resources they could obtain. In addition, they would also gain greater access in the shelter, allowing them to purchase items that were not available to regular parties. That way their party's strength would improve even faster. Soon, Discipline Paradise and Iron Wrist arrived before Shifeng, who was currently seated at a corner of the bar. Brother Expert, let me introduce you. This here is the leader of our District 5's third party, Discipline Paradise. He's quite knowledgeable about the dark den you spoke of, Iron Wrist said, smiling. Hello, you can just call me Discipline. Discipline Paradise smiled. Although Discipline Paradise was one of the powerhouses of District 5, he did not display any form of arrogance. On the contrary, he was a very kind and straightforward man. When the surrounding players saw Discipline Paradise, the leader of the third party, and Iron Wrist, the leader of the seventh party, actively greeting a swordsman that none of them had ever seen before, every one of them was stupefied. Who is that person? Why haven't I seen him before? Is he one of the top 10 party leaders of some other district? I don't think he's just limited to being in the top 10, right? Didn't you hear Iron Wrist calling that person an expert? That person might even be one of the top 3 party leaders of some other district. Otherwise, why would Discipline Paradise personally come over to meet him? Everyone began guessing at Shifeng's identity one after another. However, Discipline Paradise's next words instantly shocked everyone inside the bar. Brother Yifeng, would you be willing to join our District 5's Crusading army? Chapter 579, Crusading Army. Join the Crusading army? Shifeng began pondering silently. He did indeed want to go and take a look at Gloomy Valley, with his goal for going there being the Chapter of Darkness. After all, there might be some sort of connection between the chapter and the Bible of Darkness. However, he had intended to go there by himself. There was only a single Chapter of Darkness. With so many people wanting to obtain it, how was he supposed to get it if he went with a group? It was also unlikely that everyone would give him the Chapter of Darkness. Hence, the only way for him to obtain it was to move alone. That way he would not have to share the chapter with others. Based on the information he had gathered earlier, there was no need to defeat the Great Lord Noya to get the Chapter of Darkness. The Great Lord was simply guarding the Chapter of Darkness. Hence, Shifeng could just steal the chapter. There was no real need for him to conquer the Great Lord. The difficulty of obtaining the Chapter of Darkness this way was undeniably much lower. Moreover, he had already succeeded in carrying out similar feats in the past. Previously, he had stolen an imperial heirloom from the Anubis's gatekeeper, a Great Lord-ranked monster. Afterward, he had also snatched the God Crystal from a Tier 4 mythic creature, the Orc King Trezek. The first theft was difficult, but the subsequent one was easy. Currently, he had much more confidence in stealing an item from a Great Lord. That's right, join the Crusading army. To be precise, I am asking you to join our third party, Discipline Paradise said, his eyes filled with sincerity. Hearing Discipline Paradise's words, all the players inside the bar could not help but turn to look at Shi Feng, envious expressions appearing on their faces. The crusade this time was not something just anyone could participate in. As it was a crusade against Gloomy Valley, the number of players they could bring was limited. Naturally, they would only allow elites to participate in it. That way would increase the chances of success considerably. Meanwhile, in District 5, only the top 10 ranking parties received direct admission into the Crusading army. Everyone else had to go through a test, and only the best could join the crusade. There were many players in District 5. Meanwhile, only a total of 100 slots were allotted to District 5 for the crusade. Among them, 60 were already assigned to the top 10 parties, so everyone else would have to fight for the remaining 40 slots. One could just imagine how intense the competition would be. Now, Shi Feng could join the third party directly and participate in the crusade without having to compete over those 40 slots. This was practically a gift from the heavens. As long as the crusade succeeded, the 100 players participating in it would receive a bountiful harvest, particularly in terms of contribution shares for the shelter. How could this situation not make others envious? Discipline, how can you be so underhanded? Iron Wrist suddenly called out. Even if Brother Yi Feng is going to join the Crusading army, he should be joining my 7th party, not your 3rd party. I only invited you over to discuss matters relating to the Dark Den. When Iron Wrist had gone looking for Discipline Paradise earlier, he had told the Guardian Knight everything about his encounter with Shi Feng. However, he had not expected Discipline Paradise to actually play such a card. No matter how one looked at it, Shi Feng was a maverick with frightening strength. Although the Crusading army this time had gathered the power of multiple districts, after the crusade succeeded, the number of contribution shares awarded would be based on each party's performance in the crusade. In other words, the party that was the most helpful during the raid of the Great Lord Noya would receive the most contribution shares once the Great Lord was defeated. Most importantly, the party that received the highest contribution shares had priority in choosing from the loot. If Iron Wrist could get a maverick like Shi Feng to join the 7th party, his party's strength would no doubt soar. At that time, the number of contribution shares they could obtain was self-evident. Hence, he was doing everything he could to befriend Shi Feng. This is not a first-come, first-served thing. Moreover, regarding this matter, I won't back off even if you're my friend, Discipline Paradise said in a righteous tone. Also, it will be of great help to Brother Yi Feng if he joins my 3rd party. Suddenly, Discipline Paradise and Iron Wrist began arguing with each other over Shi Feng. What is this situation? Can someone tell me who that swordsman is? The scene of 2 District 5 big shots arguing over an unknown swordsman stunned the players drinking inside the bar. Great help? Shi Feng could not help but ask, may I know what kind of help Brother Discipline is referring to? The Chapter of Darkness. Discipline Paradise sent a whisper to Shi Feng. This item serves a huge purpose for shelters. However, it is also closely related to the Dark Denver. From the information I gathered, the Chapter of Darkness is a key meant to open the Dark Denver. Since Brother Yi Feng wishes to go to the Dark Den, you will naturally have to obtain the Chapter of Darkness. However, the Chapter of Darkness is in the Great Lord Noya's hands. If one wishes to obtain it, they will have to either kill or steal the chapter from the Great Lord. Only the latter option is practically impossible. The only feasible method to gain the chapter is to kill the Great Lord. As long as Brother Yi Feng joins our party, we will definitely have a chance to become the top contributing party in the crusade. At that time we can choose the Chapter of Darkness as our reward. I will then use the Chapter of Darkness to open the Dark Den for Brother Yi Feng. What does Brother Yi Feng think about this? So that's the case. Shi Feng suddenly came to a realization. Nodding, he said, all right then. I'll agree to your proposal. However, I wish to change the conditions a little. Change the conditions? Discipline Paradise asked, slightly worried. What conditions? You can't be wanting the Chapter of Darkness itself, right? The Chapter of Darkness had only 2 functions, empowering the magic array of a shelter and opening the Dark Denver. To a maverick, the first function was obviously useless. This was also the reason why Discipline Paradise had come looking to cooperate with Shi Feng. Rest assured, I don't want the Chapter of Darkness. Only if I manage to obtain the Chapter of Darkness by myself, what will you use to exchange for it? Shi Feng asked secretly. Obtain the Chapter of Darkness by yourself? How can that be possible? Discipline Paradise asked, stunned. I am only saying, if, Shifeng laughed. If you manage to get the Chapter of Darkness by yourself, I will definitely provide you with sufficient remuneration. Taboo skills, curses, top-tier equipment, whatever, as long as you are willing to exchange it. Discipline Paradise did not know what was going through Shifeng's mind, but if he could obtain the Chapter of Darkness, it would be of great help to their party. Hence he was willing to pay any price for it. Shifeng was slightly stunned after hearing Discipline Paradise's words. Exchange taboo skills can be traded? Shifeng asked softly. Discipline Paradise nodded. Of course. Only the price required to do so is somewhat high. However, for the Chapter of Darkness, I am willing to pay 6 Tier 1 taboo skills. 6. Shifeng shook his head. If I obtain the Chapter of Darkness, I want to exchange it for a Tier 1 taboo skill for every class, as well as the activation of the Dark Denver. Can you really do it? Discipline Paradise asked in surprise. A Tier 1 taboo skill for every class, this price was indeed frightening. Even for Discipline Paradise, this was a very steep price. The Chapter of Darkness was merely a dark gold item with a somewhat special function. In truth, it was worth only 7 or 8 pieces of dark gold equipment. Meanwhile, the value of a taboo skill was no less than a piece of dark gold equipment. Since there was a total of 12 major classes, that meant a total of 12 taboo skills, equivalent to 12 pieces of dark gold equipment. Dark gold equipment was considered a luxury item for any party. If one had to give away 12 pieces all of a sudden, any party would feel a sting in their hearts. However, compared to this painful price, what Discipline Paradise was most concerned about was whether or not Shifeng could obtain the Chapter of Darkness. Chapter 580 Abyssal Upgrade. In response to Discipline Paradise's question, Shifeng only smiled while remaining silent. Receiving such a reply from Shifeng, Discipline Paradise didn't get angry. His eyes glowed with excitement. Instead, his trust in Shifeng growing even stronger. Previously, he had heard from Iron Wrist that Shifeng had managed to defeat a level 42 chieftain-ranked dark magic serpent all by himself. This was definitely a feat that no ordinary person was capable of. Currently, there were only 10 parties capable of hunting dark magic serpents in District 5. Other than their excellent techniques and equipment, the main reason why these 10 parties were equal to the task was their having learned Tier 1 taboo skills that countered these chieftains. Otherwise, they all would be powerless against dark magic serpents. As for defeating a dark magic serpent single-handedly, not even he, the leader of District 5's third party, had ever dreamed of attempting such a feat. Due to this reason, he had come over personally to invite Shifeng to join their team and aid them in competing for the Chapter of Darkness. When will Brother Yifeng be able to obtain the Chapter of Darkness? Discipline Paradise asked somewhat anxiously. Hints of reverence and elation gleamed in his eyes. Although several districts were participating in the crusade against the Great Lord Noya this time, Noya was a level 40 Great Lord. Even if everyone combined their power, victory over the Great Lord was still a long shot. They had made ample preparations, yet their current predicted success rate was below 10%. The odds for stealing the Chapter of Darkness weren't worth mentioning. It was not easy for a party to survive in a shelter. Besides constantly competing over the party rankings inside a shelter, parties also needed to defend the shelter every day lest the shelter fall into ruin and all their efforts come to naught. Now that an expert like Shifeng had shown up, the third party would have a much better chance at obtaining the Chapter of Darkness. Noya was no ordinary Great Lord, it was a guardian monster serving as the key for activating a new map. Such guardian monsters normally tested a player's individual abilities. Having more players participating in the crusade would only lead to more mistakes occurring. Ever since God's Domain began, Mavericks had been the ones to activate many of the new maps. Hence, everyone in this place revered Mavericks greatly as they had managed to accomplish a task that most parties couldn't. Meanwhile, this was the first time Discipline Paradise encountered a Maverick as strong as Shifeng. Shifeng's chances of obtaining the Chapter of Darkness were definitely much higher than their crusading armies. I'll give it a go as soon as possible. Shifeng could not give an accurate timeline. After all, he had not yet seen Noya personally. However, with his equipment and means, he should have an excellent chance of stealing the item the Great Lord was guarding. I hope that Brother Discipline can prepare the Tier 1 taboo skills as soon as possible. Tier 1 taboo skills and curses were not cabbages piled high in the market. Based on the information Shifeng had collected, out of the tens of thousands of players in District 5, only the top 5 parties possessed 6 or more Tier 1 taboo skills and curses. Iron Wrist's 7th party had 2, however, currently only one of his members had succeeded in learning a Tier 1 curse. One could just imagine how difficult it was to obtain Tier 1 taboo skills and curses. Brother Yifeng can rest assured on this point. As long as you succeed in getting the Chapter of Darkness, I will definitely hand over 12 Tier 1 taboo skills. Discipline Paradise laughed confidently. Following which, Discipline Paradise shared with Shifeng specific information regarding Noya. Unfortunately, Shifeng and Discipline Paradise's conversation in a private chat dismayed Iron Wrist, who was seated beside the two. However, seeing how Discipline Paradise, the leader of the third party, was acting so respectfully with Shifeng, Iron Wrist also could not help but feel a little prideful. After Discipline Paradise left, Shifeng looked at the depressed shield warrior and said, "Brother Iron Wrist, can I get you to help me with something? Brother Yifeng, please don't hold back. You are our party's savior. If you have anything you need help with, just tell me," Iron Wrist assured, clapping his chest. "Can you help me exchange these soul crystals for some level 30 fine gold ranked or above weapons?" Shifeng asked as he took out 3 gray crystals from his bag. "Heavens! You actually have so many soul crystals." Iron Wrist's eyes nearly fell out of their sockets when he saw the 3 soul crystals Shifeng produced. He finally realized why Shifeng seemed to care little about soul crystals before. In order to obtain just 1 soul crystal, their 7th party had spent several days hunting dark magic serpents. In the end, they had gotten 1 only by sheer luck. He had even shown off their party's harvest in front of Discipline Paradise. Yet now, Shifeng just casually took out 3 soul crystals. Seeing that Iron Wrist was still silent after quite some time, Shifeng could not help but ask, "Has nobody managed to obtain level 30 fine gold weapons yet?" The players residing in District 5 were very high-leveled. The high-ranking parties often challenged monsters of higher levels. Although only a few parties were capable of defeating level 40 monsters, there should be plenty that could handle monsters that were level 30 or so. Shifeng had also seen plenty of players selling level 30 bronze and mysterious iron equipment on the streets earlier. Moreover, they were selling the items very cheaply. This was a scene that had yet to appear in White River City. However, after giving it some thought, Shifeng found it to be reasonable. The players here were killing monsters day in and day out, especially since monster armies attacked the shelter at night. They were improving their combat techniques daily. In addition to other factors such as gemstones, challenging monsters of a higher level was routine. However, while the players here found it very normal to fight against monsters of a higher level, it was a different story for the players outside the Dark Den. Players outside preferred to grind monsters of a lower level whenever possible. They definitely would not choose to grind monsters that were of the same level as, or even higher level than, they were, as doing so would mean increased risk. As a result, players outside the Dark Den improved their combat techniques and upgraded their equipment at a much slower rate. "That's not it. Brother Yifeng, do you really want to exchange soul crystals for weapons? That's just such a waste." Although the market value of a soul crystal is equal to 1 level 30 dark gold weapon or 5 fine gold weapons, no one who manages to obtain a soul crystal would exchange them for equipment or weapons. After all, weapons and equipment will depreciate with time. On the other hand, the contribution shares one can acquire with soul crystals will never lose their value. The true value of a soul crystal is far above a level 30 dark gold weapon. It will be an even greater loss if you exchange it for level 30 fine gold weapons, Iron Wrist advised. The shield warrior's words rendered Shifeng somewhat dumbfounded. Soul crystals were really of no value to him. On the other hand, the value of fine gold and dark gold weapons was much higher. As for why he wanted these weapons, he was planning to upgrade the Abyssal Blade to level 30. A level 40 Great Lord was no pushover, and it would be to Shifeng's benefit to increase his combat power as much as possible. As a magic weapon, the higher leveled the Abyssal Blade was, the higher its attributes and quality would be. When Shifeng first obtained the Abyssal Blade, the magic weapon's attributes were only equal to a secret silver weapon. Now that the weapon was level 25, its attributes were already above dark gold rank. If Shifeng upgraded it to level 30, it might reach the standard of an epic weapon. A level 30 epic weapon would definitely push his combat power up to a whole new level. At that time, he would have much more confidence in stealing the Chapter of Darkness. Seeing how Feng was insistent on exchanging his soul crystals for weapons, Iron Wrist had no choice but to comply and think of a way to carry out the Maverick's wishes. An hour or so later, Iron Wrist had managed to exchange the 3 soul crystals for 1 level 30 dark gold weapon and 11 level 30 fine gold weapons. After Feng received the weapons, he parted ways with Iron Wrist and went searching for a secluded location. The commotion the Abyssal Blade caused with each subsequent evolution grew increasingly larger. Now that Feng was about to upgrade the magic weapon to level 30, the aftermath would definitely alarm the entire District 5. Not wanting to attract any attention to himself, Feng had no choice but to head for an out-of-the-way spot. Devour. Feng chose to upgrade the Abyssal Blade upon arriving at a wilderness with no other players around. Chapter 581, Epic Weapon. The moment Feng's finger made contact with the system window, the pitch-black Abyssal Blade released a dragon's roar. The deafening roar sounded as if an actual dragon stood before Feng right now. With such a ferocious roar, even the birds in flight were petrified, falling out of the sky one after another. Immediately after letting out the dragon's roar, the Abyssal Blade struggled free from Feng's hand and flew into the air. In the blink of an eye, the pitch-black Abyssal Blade transformed into a cloud of black mist that devoured the 11 sacrificial weapons. As it consumed the weapons, Feng could also hear a strong heartbeat coming from the black mist. It was as if an ancient creature was awakening. A terrifying aura washed over Feng and his surroundings. The nearby greenery even withered. Why is there such a huge difference in power from the last evolution? Feng looked at the black mist floating in midair, frowning. Is this the beginning of a backlash? Feng had never witnessed or heard any details about the backlash of a magic weapon before. In the past, players who obtained magic weapons had never disclosed any information regarding backlashes. They only advised others to stay as far away as possible from magic weapons. The pressure the Abyssal Blade was currently emitting was incredibly terrifying. Back when Feng upgraded the magic weapon to level 25, he could still move about relatively easily under the aura the weapon emanated. Now, however, even motion was a luxury. He could only stand still and watch quietly as all of this happened. After a while, the magnitude of the heartbeats gradually increased. The black mist in the sky also took the shape of a black heart. Meanwhile, with this black heart as the core, a vaporous phantom of a black dragon appeared. The black dragon silently looked down on Feng, a human-like playful expression contained within its blood-red eyes. In the next moment, the phantom dissipated into nothing, this time transforming into a silver sword that landed at Feng's feet. The phantom of the black dragon is becoming more realistic with each subsequent evolution. Even the pressure it emits is growing stronger. No wonder so many players dared not use magic weapons even though they had obtained them. Feng frowned slightly as he looked at the Abyssal Blade, which had stabbed into the ground. When and where a backlash would occur, nobody knew. Continuously strengthening the Abyssal Blade was equivalent to enhancing the power of the magic weapon's backlash. Just the current Abyssal Blade could already make him feel fearful. If he continued upgrading the Abyssal Blade, he might really fail to cope with the backlash. This should be the so-called, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Forget it. Let's take things as they come. Feng shook his head, dispelling the negative thoughts in his head. He then pulled out the Abyssal Blade and took a look at its attributes. Abyssal Blade, one-handed sword, magic weapon. Attack power plus 633. All attributes plus 42. Attack speed plus 15. Ignore levels plus 15. Attacks half. 50% chance to cause 200% damage. 25% chance to cause 300% damage. Every attack increases attack speed by 2%, up to a maximum of 20%. If wielder belongs to any swordsman-related class, all skill levels plus 3. Increase free ability points received for every increase in level by 2 points. Equipment level 30. Can be upgraded. Devour 20 level 35 fine gold weapons and 3 level 35 dark gold weapons to upgrade to level 35. Can be evolved, unknown. Additional skill 1, Phantom Kill. Instantly creates a doppelganger. You can control this doppelganger. Doppelganger will have 70% of original body's attributes and all skills. At the same time, doppelganger and the original body can be swapped. Duration, 1 minute. Cooldown, 5 minutes. Additional skill 2, Abyssal Bind. Binds enemies and prevents movement, reducing defense by 100%. Duration, 4 seconds. Cooldown, 1 minute. Additional skill 3, 9 Dragon Slash. Instantly creates 12 phantoms of the Abyssal Blade for wielder to use. Each phantom sword is capable of dealing up to 50% damage. Duration 30 seconds. Cooldown, 5 minutes. Additional skill 4, Abyssal Curse. Prevents all targets within a radius of 30 yards from moving or attacking for 5 seconds, as well as reducing all their attributes by 20% for 10 minutes. Cooldown, 40 minutes. Additional Profound Inheritance, Black Emperor. When activated, every critical hit will accumulate 1 stack of Death Aura. Each stack of Death Aura can be used to increase all attributes of wielder by 2% and attack speed and movement speed by 1% for 10 seconds, or be used to reduce the cooldown of a skill by 3 seconds. Maximum of 30 stacks of Death Aura. Duration, 10 minutes. Cooldown, 15 hours. The Abyssal Blade was personally created by Master Smith Alice's using the Black Dragon King's fangs as material. It is one of 36 famed swords and it is ranked 31st. However, this sword has been cursed by the Black Dragon King. Aside from providing the wielder with immense strength, there will be a backlash every period of time. However, after being remodeled by Jack using a star crystal, the strength of the backlash has been greatly reduced. If the wielder is unable to suppress the backlash, the wielder will receive the curse of the Black Dragon King, permanently reducing all attributes by 50%. Unable to be dropped. Unable to be traded. Such a high attack. This is equal to the attack power of a level 30 epic ranked two-handed sword, right? Shi Feng exclaimed in surprise. Back when the Abyssal Blade was level 25, its attack power had only been over 400. Now that the magic weapon was upgraded to level 30, its attack power had actually increased by over 200 points. Not to mention the weapon's skills had also undergone a transformation, with Abyssal Curse replacing Dark Violent Dance. Used against a single target or a group, it was an extremely powerful control and weakening skill. However, this was still not the most significant change to the Abyssal Blade. Swinging the magic weapon lightly, Shi Feng felt as if the Abyssal Blade was an extension of his arm, so much so that he could even feel the sword's edge cutting through the air. What's going on here? Shi Feng looked at the Abyssal Blade incredulously. There was a saying that, when one's mastery of a weapon reached a certain level, said weapon would feel like an extension of one's own body. However, this was only a saying. Just being able to incorporate a weapon into one's own attack habits and styles was already an amazing feat. During the early stages of God's domain, the attributes of weapons and equipment were very important. However, as players acquired better equipment, they would begin ordering custom-made weapons and equipment for themselves. Even if 2 items possessed the exact same attributes, most players would choose equipment custom-made to their requirements over the other. Why was this so? The reason was very simple: the far greater ease of harmonization to their habits and styles. For this reason alone, players were willing to spend as much money as necessary. If a player possessed a high compatibility rate with the weapons they wielded, their attacks would flow much more smoothly. Most importantly, a weapon with good compatibility could improve a player's skill completion rate. This was also the reason why, during the later stages of the game, many players chose to discard ready-made epic weapons and instead, were adamant in paying an astronomical sum to hire a master or grandmaster forger to produce a custom-made epic weapon for themselves. It was all because custom-made weapons and equipment possessed a much higher compatibility rate. Thinking up to this point, Shi Feng immediately began brandishing the Abyssal Blade to get used to the newly enhanced weapon. He then found a level 35 demonic hound to test his sword on. Chop. Usually, Shi Feng could achieve a completion rate of 85% or above when using this skill, displaying 100% of the skill's might. In the past, his best record for chop was 90%. Although this skill was very simple, it was extremely difficult to execute properly. The 3 sword lights, which should have resembled 3 silver crescents, converged into one as they struck at the demonic hound, causing the damage dealt by chop to reach its maximum. At this moment, however, the 3 sword lights had transformed into 3 full moons that met at a single point. The space at this single point looked as if it had been pierced. One could faintly see a small spatial crack at this location. System: chop completion rate 92%, resulting in 125% of skills effect. Skill proficiency +4. Feng then followed up with Thunder Flame Explosion. Originally, this skill should have combined the power of lightning and fire into a massive fireball that bombarded the enemy. Now, however, instead of a fireball system, Thunder Flame Explosion completion rate 90%, resulting in 110% of skill's effect. Skill proficiency +3. What? Why is there suddenly such a huge increase in skill completion rate? Feng stared at the system notification window, flabbergasted. Compared to his past self, his current strength was much stronger. In the past, his best record for chop was 90% completion rate. Although it was only a meager 2% increase, the gap was like the difference between heaven and earth. Based on the system's configuration, completion rates between 81% to 90% were categorized into the same group. Achieving any percentage within this range would give an increase of 3 proficiency points. Also, at 90%, one could display 110% of a skill's effect. At 91%, a skill's effect was directly upgraded to 120% and would yield 4 proficiency points. The improvement to Thunder Flame Explosion was even more apparent. Previously, he could not even achieve an 85% completion rate on the skill. Now, however, he had managed 90%. Feng had killed a level 35 demonic hound in just 2 moves. It's no wonder many had said magic weapons possessed frightening power, and many experts could not bring themselves to divest their magic weapons in the past. So this was the case. Feng's heart was pounding madly as he looked at the level 35 demonic hound he had just annihilated. His compatibility with the Abyssal Blade right now was practically perfect. He felt invincible. Chapter 582, The True Power of a Magic Weapon. Feng killed over a dozen level 35 demonic hounds, testing his various skills. When used with the Abyssal Blade, he could manipulate every skill of his as if just playing with a toy. He could casually mold the skill to his liking, very easily his past records of skill completion rates. In God's domain, skill completion rates were an important indicator of a player's actual strength. In the past, in order to improve the completion rate of one skill by just 1%, many players had trained arduously for days, sometimes even weeks. Particularly after reaching the 85% threshold, raising a skill's completion rate by 1% required a tremendous amount of effort. For some, even that wasn't enough. All the training in the world was useless. However, with the Abyssal Blade in hand, this ironclad law was instantly broken. When one wanted to improve their combat techniques, they first needed to learn how to control their own bodies. If one could not even control their form properly, they could never control the weapons in their hands. Feng's control over his body had long since reached a very high standard. Unfortunately, he had not reached a similar level with his control over his weapons. He could not reach a level where he could feel even a strand of hair fall onto his sword's edge. However, his compatibility with the Abyssal Blade now was practically perfect. It felt as if he had become one with the magic weapon, allowing his skill completion rate to reach new highs. At this moment, he surpassed all previous records with one of his basic skills, chop, achieving a 95% completion rate. If a skill's completion rate reached 95%, the skill would display 135% of its effects. In other words, Feng's current chop dealt an additional 35% damage compared to his previous 85% completion rate. The increase in combat power was obvious. After continuously using the newly improved Abyssal Blade for such a long time, Feng had grown addicted to the sensation he received from the magic weapon and the pleasure he felt from his strength gradually rising with every passing moment. His heart ached to remain in this state forever. After killing dozens of demonic hounds, Feng's hunger was unsated. He wanted to continue to utilize these demonic hounds to improve his completion rate. Unfortunately, time was of the essence. He needed to prioritize his quest for now. In the past, many of those who obtained magic weapons had told others not to involve themselves with these things as the magic weapon's power would devour them. So, it turns out that the power they had referred to was not a magic weapon's powerful attributes. Feng inwardly sighed as he looked at the Abyssal Blade in his hand. In the past, countless experts had trained arduously just so that they could increase their skill completion rate by just one more percentage. Some had even gone through all that effort for nothing. Yet, a magic weapon can achieve this feat easily. Moreover, as a magic weapon grows more powerful, this frightening compatibility rate will also intensify. This is the reason that players in the past had continued to upgrade their magic weapons, and as a result, drown themselves in this sea of skill completion rates, unable to pull themselves from the allure of this power. Thus far, Shifeng had only trained for half an hour or so, and already his stagnant skill completion rates had improved massively. Moreover, Shifeng could clearly feel that he had yet to reach his limit. Such power was truly terrifying. This was a temptation that no expert could distance themselves from. After all, there was not a single expert that did not wish to further refine their own techniques, particularly in this virtual world that was filled with various chance encounters. Even Shifeng, someone who had played God's Domain for over a decade, hungered to upgrade the Abyssal Blade once more, improving the magic weapon's compatibility rate again. This way he might be able to refine his skill completion rate further. Achieving a 95% completion rate had already increased his combat power by 35%. Every 1% past 90% could increase a skill's effect significantly, not to mention past 95%. At that time, just how terrifying would his skills become? It might even be possible to double his combat power. The impact of raising his skill completion rates was far more valuable than learning a single taboo skill. After all, a taboo skill was only one attack. Although its might surpass skills of the same tier, what would happen the taboo skill's duration? In the end he would return to his prior strength. Meanwhile, a player normally incorporated a variety of basic skills into their attacks when engaged in battle. If every skill could achieve a 100% completion rate, one could easily wipe the floor with a player that had learned a taboo skill of the same tier. This was the true power of a magic weapon. Its main purpose lay not in increasing its wielder's attributes, but rather, its main function was to improve the fundamentals of a player's techniques. Not even fragmented legendary weapons could offer such a devastating benefit, much less epic weapons. In the past, every player that wielded a magic weapon was undoubtedly a top-tier expert. Some even stood at God's Domain's peak. Shifeng finally understood that their achievements were all due to the intense compatibility rates that magic weapons offered. Of course, this improvement method was more of a form of diabolism. After all, most of the apex experts of God's Domain had attained their strength step by step. They had first trained their physical control to the very limit. They then focused on their control over their weapons. Apex experts like these possessed unshakable foundations. Even if they switched to new weapons and equipment, their strength would not decrease significantly and would soon recover. However, it was a different story for magic weapon wielders. For those who had obtained a magic weapon at the very start of the game, if they suddenly lost their magic weapons, their strength would plummet. Someone who had initially been an apex expert might instantly become a nobody. Hence, in the past, none of the wielders were willing to part with their magic weapons. As a result, their magic weapons eventually devoured them, and they were forced to start all over again. However, this inspired an idea in Shifeng. If he wanted to nurture experts quickly, it would be best to start with searching for weapons with high compatibility rates. If a player possessed weapons or piece of equipment that was highly compatible, their strength would skyrocket. Currently, Zero Wing had extremely few top-tier experts, and the standard of the guild's elite members was still relatively low. Meanwhile, dungeons required very high levels of personal strength. Zero Wing's advantage of raiding speed was only due to the equipment its team wore. In truth, they were far weaker than those teams that relied on personal combat techniques. The dungeon's final boss was particularly challenging for Zero Wing. There was practically no way to improve the equipment of Zero Wing's core members any further at the moment. If they wished to increase their combat power, they could only do so through skill completion rates. Unfortunately, until now, Zero Wing's members had only focused on finding ways to obtain better weapons and equipment to increase their attributes. They had mostly neglected to improve their skill completion rates. Currently, even Fire Dance, the most powerful melee fighter on Zero Wing's core team, could only achieve a maximum skill completion rate of 80%. She was still a great distance away from reaching 85%. If he could improve Fire Dance and the others' compatibility rates with their weapons, the combat power of Zero Wing's core team would improve by leaps and bounds. Compatibility rate? Shifeng pondered aloud. In fact, he did have a method that could improve one's compatibility rate. He could recruit a master forger into the guild. Although master forgers could not produce a weapon with a 100% compatibility rate with a player, if Zero Wing had a master forger, said forger could, more or less, produce tailor-made weapons and equipment with slightly higher compatibility rates for some of the guild's members. This would help the guild's experts massively. Only, nurturing a master forger was easier said than done. Feng no longer wasted time as he sheathed the Abyssal blade and made his way to Gloomy Valley. Gray mist shrouded Gloomy Valley all year round, limiting players' vision as they explored the area. Moreover, Feng could feel the gray mist suppressing all 5 of his senses while he wandered the valley. It was as if he stood deep within the blood mist of the Demonkin army's killing intent. Only the suppression effects were much weaker here. The majority of the monsters inside Gloomy Valley were level 40 or above elite rank. There were also plenty of level 40 or above special elites roaming around. Even the outermost region of the valley was a challenge to get through. Meanwhile, in Gloomy Valley's inner region, the level 40 Great Lord Noya stood guard at the gate leading to the next map. If one wished to journey to the new map, they first needed to kill Noya. That's Noya? Sure enough, it's strong. Feng hid in the forest as he observed the massive gargoyle in front of the valley's entrance. Noya, Demonic Great Lord. Level 40. HP 10, 000/10, 000. Chapter 583, Suppressing a Great Lord. To current players, a level 40 demonic Great Lord was a nightmare. Noya was also a gargoyle. Among demonic creatures, gargoyles ranked at the top in terms of magic resistance and defense. Worse, gargoyles possessed a massive pair of wings that enabled them to soar through the sky. If players encountered one, they would not even have the chance to escape. Gargoyles could also attack from the sky, leaving melee players at a great disadvantage. Only ranged classes posed any threat to gargoyles. A black slate tablet was embedded into the towering gate that Great Lord Noya protected. A faint gray barrier also prevented anyone from reaching the gate. Meanwhile, demonic power filled that black slate tablet. It was none other than the chapter of darkness that Feng was trying to obtain. It was also the core energy source for the barrier protecting the stone gate. If one wanted to obtain the chapter of darkness, not only were they required to defend themselves against the gargoyles' attacks, but they also had to break the barrier. It was practically impossible for anyone to obtain the chapter of darkness without killing the Great Lord Noya. Only after defeating the gargoyle could one attempt to break the gray barrier. As Feng approached the gate stealthily, he could faintly hear noise from nearby, and he turned to look for the source. Why are players here at such a time? Feng was surprised. A short distance from the massive stone gate, a team of 100 players with levels ranging from 28 to 29 slowly approached, seemingly intending to raid the Great Lord. The sky grew darker by the minute, and it wouldn't be long before night arrived. To players, this was an extremely unfavorable situation. Ordinary players would normally hurry back to their respective shelters at this time of day. Are they planning to raid Noya now? Feng could not help his shock. At this moment, this team of 100 players had already spread out and moved into formation. It was obvious that they intended to raid Noya. Only, a level 40 field Great Lord was not an easy opponent. Even a 500-strong team would face one ending, death. Otherwise, District 5 would not have joined hands with several other districts in an attempt to raid Noya. Meanwhile, the Crusading army, which several shelters had organized, consisted of 1,000 players. Of course, this did not mean that all 1,000 players would enter the battle simultaneously. Instead, they planned to use a rotational tactic, taking turns to wear out the Great Lord. Field bosses would grow stronger depending on the number of players within their area of influence. For a Great Lord like Noya, when that number exceeded 100, its HP, defense, and attack power would increase significantly. Hence, when fighting a field Great Lord, it was ideal to send a team of 100 players or have several teams of 100 players rotate in and out of battle. This was also the method that guilds favored when dealing with field bosses. Watching the 100 players stand before Noya, one could easily tell that they were not ordinary players based on their levels. In District 5, level 28 or 29 players stood at the peak of the shelter, yet there were actually 100 such players here right now. However, against a level 40 Great Lord, this team was still far from enough. Go! As the leading elementalist shouted, the 12 elementalists that had surrounded the gargoyle promptly unfurled the magic scrolls in their hands and began chanting. These 12 magic scrolls seemed to be of one body as they formed a complex 12-star magic array. In the blink of an eye, this 12-star magic array enveloped the Great Lord Noya. Powerful elemental mana continuously suppressed the field boss, who stood in this array's center, causing the Great Lord to release an angry bellow. Humans? It's you damned humans again. I'll sacrifice you all to Lord Carlo. Despite the 12-star magic array, Noya still revealed a sinister smile. You can smile even in the face of death? The leading elementalist sneered. Everyone attack. With the demon suppressing barrier in effect, it won't be able to display even 1/10 of its strength. The chapter of darkness is fated to belong to District 1 this time. Everyone nodded in agreement as they charged towards the Great Lord. The people from District 1 are insane. Shifeng silently clicked his tongue. Although he had heard that District 1 was the most powerful shelter in the Dark Den, trying to raid a Great Lord using such a brute force method was clearly not a wise move. Just like the leading elementalist had said, a demon-suppressing array formed by the power of 12 elementalists was indeed powerful. Even a peerless Great Lord could only display about 1/10 of its strength while contained in this barrier. With this, their MTs could definitely tank a level 40 Great Lord. However, the demon-suppressing array required 12 elementalists to maintain it. Moreover, the barrier took an immense toll on the elementalist's mana. If even one elementalist ran out of mana, the barrier would immediately crumble. Normally, only teams that were extremely confident in their DPS would attempt this method. After all, after one took into account the slots for MTs and healers, there were only 70 or so slots for DPS classes on a 100-player team. Losing another 12 core damage dealers would greatly affect the team's overall damage. Particularly, the abilities of the team's DPS were further put to the test when one considered the problem of the barrier's duration. Following which, the 6 MTs of District 1 took turns receiving the Noya's attacks. With the rear line healers healing them, the MTs managed to stop the gargoyle's fierce attacks easily. At the same time, the other DPS of the team also began to attack the Great Lord madly. Fireballs, frost arrows, all sorts of magical and physical attacks bombarded Noya. Although the Great Lord's strength had been suppressed, greatly weakening its attack power and defense, the players of District 1 could not inflict enough damage. The highest damage they dealt did not even exceed -1,000. Damn. Why does this monster have so much defense? The leading elementalist frowned. Gritting his teeth, he shouted, "Move on to Plan B." Immediately, a cursemancer began chanting an incantation. The spell this cursemancer used was one that Shifeng was very familiar with. It was none other than the Tier 1 curse that Ironwrist's party had used, Dark Storm. Not only could it inflict large amounts of damage, but it could also heavily injure its target, greatly reducing the target's defense. When Dark Storm struck Noya, damages of over -3,000 points appeared above its head, one after another. The Tier 1 curse only dealt a total damage of around -10,000 points to the Great Lord. To Noya, who possessed 10 million HP, this was not even a scratch. Following which, everyone's damage abruptly soared, and many dealt over -1,000 with their attacks. Unfortunately, the duration of Dark Storm's effect was limited. A short moment later, everyone's damage fell. Next, the leading elementalist shouted. Another cursemancer began chanting, similarly casting the Tier 1 curse, Dark Storm. In such a way, the team repeatedly cast Tier 1 curses at Noya. Eventually, the gargoyle's HP fell to 60%. What an amazing team. Not even Zero Wings' core team is capable of wearing out a level 40 Great Lord to such a degree. Shifeng was quite surprised as he watched this scene. However, he was also pleased. Initially, he had struggled to think of a way to break the Grey Barrier. However, now that someone pinned down the Great Lord for him, he could head over to the barrier and take his time researching it. Chapter 584. What can you do to me? While Shifeng slowly circled to the other side of the battlefield, Great Lord Noya's HP suddenly decreased rapidly. This decrease could clearly be seen with the naked eye. At this moment, Noya was losing 1% of its HP every second. This sudden decrease was even greater than the damage that the District 1 team managed to cause. Is it nighttime already? The leading elementalist lifted his head to look up at the gloomy sky. The moon had already emerged. As moonlight touched on the Great Lord, Noya began to change. Its originally massive 3-story tall body began to shrink rapidly, and its maximum HP fell from its original 10 million to 6 million. However, as the gargoyle's body shrunk, its strength continuously rose, the Great Lord's damage increasing as well. Initially, Noya had only dealt around -2,000 to -3,000 to District 1's MTs. Now, however, every attack dealt over -4,000 damage. The MTs receiving the Great Lord's attacks had more than 8,000 HP. Before, even if they were unlucky enough to receive a critical hit from the Great Lord, they would still live. Now, however, a critical hit would definitely kill an MT. Take turns activating your life-saving skills to tank the boss. Healers, concentrate on the lead MT. The leading elementalist commanded. He had long since prepared for this. Following which, one of the shield warriors activated a Tier 1 shield wall, reducing the damage he received by half for 20 seconds. The damage Noya dealt instantly fell from nearly -5,000 points to just over -2,000 points. Meanwhile, the healers at the rear began dumping heals on the shield warrior, easily replenishing the 2,000 plus HP the shield warrior lost. However, after 5 seconds or so, the shield warrior suddenly struggled to cope with the Great Lord's attacks. The damage Noya's attacks dealt suddenly increased from over -2,000 points to almost -4,000. If not for shield wall, the shield warrior might have lost his life instantly. Leader, Noya is more powerful than we thought. If its damage continues rising, our MTs won't last. A female cleric said hurriedly. Since the battle had begun, the healers had not struggled to keep the team's MTs alive. They had also specifically chosen this time to challenge Noya. Based on their previous observations, Noya's HP during daytime was simply too high. When the sun set, however, the gargoyle's HP fell from 10 million to 6 million, though its damage would soar in return. With their team's damage output, if Noya had 10 million HP, they could defeat the Great Lord within the demon-suppressing barrier's duration. So, they could only give the 6 million HP Noya a try. Also, the longer Noya fought at night, the higher its damage became. Hence, they had chosen to challenge Noya near twilight. Only the Great Lord's damage scaling exceeded their initial estimations. Damn. Its damage is increasing far too quickly. The leading elementalist glanced at his own remaining mana. At most, the demon-suppressing barrier would last a few more minutes. Currently, however, Noya still had more than 3 million HP. It was impossible for their team to deal that much damage in such a short time. Gritting his teeth, he yelled, "Retreat!" Soon, everyone began to back away from the gargoyle in an organized retreat. The lead MT also began retreating from the barrier one step at a time. Not only could the demon-suppressing barrier suppress demonic creatures, but it also limited a demon's range of activity. Only while no one repelled Noya, the gargoyle was able to attack the barrier freely. The damage the barrier received rapidly depleted the 12 elementalists' mana. By the time everyone left the barrier, Noya's eyes narrowed as it revealed a cold smile. The gargoyle then roared. Suddenly, Noya's body cracked, some fragments falling from its body. These fragments then transformed into more than a dozen miniature Noyas that were as tall as a normal person. However, these miniature Noyas were no trivial monsters. Although each only had 200,000 HP, they were all level 40 chieftain-ranked monsters. Immediately, these monsters bombarded the demon-suppressing barrier with attacks, and in just 5 seconds the 12 elementalists lost their remaining mana. As a result, the demon-suppressing barrier crumbled. These Lord-ranked Noyas then spread their wings, soaring into the air as they chased after the withdrawing players. 4 monsters capable of flight, it was child's play to chase players who fled on foot. After a short moment, the gargoyles caught up to the escaping players of District 1, engaging in a skirmish. With one attack, these miniature Noyas dealt over -3,000 damage to the team's MTs. As for those who weren't plate armor classes, most were instantly killed. These miniature Noyas' damage practically rivaled Lord-ranked monsters. Damn. They're just chieftains. Why are their attacks so powerful? A guardian knight shouted, complaining as he was beaten to death by 3 miniature Noyas. Not even the team's healers could keep him alive. In just a moment, the team of 100 lost 7 of its members. Meanwhile, the Great Lord Noya simply remained in front of the massive stone gate, protecting the chapter of darkness while watching the members of District 1 die one by one. If a team of 100 had to face over a dozen chieftains, each with an attack power that could rival a Lord-ranked monster, the team had no chance of survival. This Great Lord is really powerful. It also knows the split skill. With this skill, there is no point in fighting a rotational battle. Shi Feng, who had been watching the battle from a short distance away, silently clicked his tongue. Split was a skill that allowed a monster to split into many weaker versions of itself. If players did not kill these doppelgangers in time, these doppelgangers would become nutrients for the main body, recovering large amounts of HP. It was one of the most annoying skills a boss could possess. If a great lord like Noya possessed this skill, a rotational battle would be useless. It was simply impossible for a team of 100 players to defeat so many chieftains in time. No matter how many players a team swapped, the result would not change. However, Split was not without a weakness. After using Split, Noya's main form would not be able to attack, making it a perfect chance to damage the Great Lord. However, the raid team needed to be able to annihilate all the doppelgangers in time. Otherwise, there was no point in attacking the main body, as Noya could recover the lost HP by absorbing its doppelgangers. Now that Noya's doppelgangers were chasing District 1's players, Shifeng dashed towards the Grey Barrier. Despicable human. You dare think of stealing the Chapter of Darkness? Noya bellowed as it discovered Shifeng standing before the Grey Barrier. Shifeng responded to the Great Lord with a sideways glance that said, "What can you do to me?" Following which, Shifeng ignored Noya as he began attacking the Grey Barrier. At this moment, Noya could only watch helplessly. As long as its doppelgangers were still alive, Noya's main body was unable to move or attack. This was the rule of the Split skill, and not even a Great Lord could break this rule. As Shifeng swung the Abyssal Blade, multiple silver blades of light that could cut even space itself bombarded the Grey Barrier. Boom, boom, boom. After over a dozen consecutive hits, cracks began to appear on the Grey Barrier. Unfortunately, these cracks began healing at a rate visible to the naked eye, taking only moments to disappear. Interesting. Shifeng's eyes glowed. Immediately, Shifeng launched a fierce assault on the barrier, his attack rate continuously increasing. There were two methods to break a barrier. One was through deciphering, while the other was through brute force. However, the latter method required a very high strength. Without having a certain amount of strength, all attacks against the barrier would be useless. It was simply impossible for players at Shifeng's level to force their way through this Grey Barrier. They could only think of a way to decipher it. However, Shifeng was different. Currently, the Abyssal Blade was as strong as an epic weapon. Shifeng also possessed the fragmented legendary ranked Heavenly Dragon's Breath and the epic ranked 7 Luminaries Ring. Furthermore, he wore the Tier 1 set equipment for swordsman. His attributes far surpassed ordinary players of the same level. Despicable. Lowly ant, cease your actions. Noya's eyes turned crimson as it began to panic. However, as its doppelgangers were still around, it was unable to take action against Shifeng. It could only watch as Shifeng damaged the Grey Barrier. Despite the Chapter of Darkness supplying an endless stream of power, the barrier's self-repair speed could not keep up with Shifeng's damage. As a result, more and more cracks started appearing on the Grey Barrier. As the cracks expanded and were about to cover the entire barrier. "Human, you have truly angered me now." Noya released a frightening roar. In the next moment, the doppelgangers that had chased the members of District 1 collapsed, one after another. That's right, collapsed, not absorbed. Noya cancelled Split midway through the skill's duration. Leaping into the air, the gargoyle flew towards Shifeng. At this moment, a pitch-black scythe suddenly appeared in Noya's hand. Countless wraiths emitted ear-piercing screeches that echoed throughout the valley as they writhed on the snow-white blade of this scythe. Arriving before Shifeng, Noya swung its scythe towards the despicable little ant. The scythe transformed into a black fissure that was as fine as a hair. This fissure was a phenomenon caused due to the scythe's blade slicing apart space. It was as if space had been cut into two. This black fissure extended towards Shifeng. Chapter 585, Perfect Skill. Although Shifeng had bombarded the Grey Barrier all this time, his attention never once left the Great Lord Noya. High-ranking bosses in God's domain possessed very high intelligence. In a desperate situation, they were capable of carrying out actions that surpassed one's imaginations. Forcefully canceling Split caused a massive backlash. Initially, Noya still had over 3 million HP. Now, however, it only had over 2 million HP. Moreover, it was obvious that, overall, the gargoyle had weakened significantly. This Great Lord is simply insane. Cold sweat slid down Shifeng's back as he looked at the black fissure extending towards him. This move was the Tier 3 Taboo skill, Dark Annihilation, and it was a skill known for having the highest single target attack power among all Tier 3 skills. Its might could rival even the Tier 4 skill, Dimensional Slash. It was a frightening skill that could only be dodged, not blocked. However, as Dark Annihilation was a very powerful skill, its user would also receive a strong backlash that would place them in a weakened state for a long time. Shi Feng had not expected the Great Lord to be so decisive. First, it forcefully cancelled Split. Now it even used a Tier 3 Taboo skill. Without hesitation, Shi Feng immediately switched to the Aura of Earth and activated Absolute Defense, becoming invincible for 5 seconds. Immediately, a golden barrier appeared around Shi Feng's body. The instant the Black Fissure collided with this barrier, the impact sent Shi Feng flying. He felt as if he had just been struck by a truck. Shi Feng flew over 20 yards through the air, his body slamming into a cliff. However, Noya was far from done with its attack. The gargoyle continued to brandish its scythe, sending a stream of black fissures striking at Shi Feng, who was embedded inside the cliff. Dark Annihilation was not a one-off skill. Rather, the skill functioned to enhance its user's attacks for a certain amount of time. After suffering over a dozen attacks, the cliff collapsed, transforming into neatly cut gravel that exploded in all directions. This sensational scene stupefied the players of District 1, who currently watched from afar. Compared to their prior battle with Noya, Shi Feng's battle with the Great Lord was on an entirely different level. If Noya had used this move against them, it would have wiped them out instantly. They would not have had a chance. Damn. That gargoyle had actually been toying with us. The leading elementalist tightly gripped his staff, feeling humiliated. Leader, this is weird. Why is Noya attacking a cliff instead of us? What's going on here? A level 29 shield warrior asked curiously. Has Noya gone insane? That's not it. I've already used Eagle Eyes to take a look. Noya is currently attacking a swordsman player, a ranger explained. This swordsman sure is dumb. He actually tried to steal the chapter of darkness while we fought Noya. Does he really think the gargoyle will let him steal the chapter so easily? If it were that simple, we would have done it long ago. Many players on the team began ridiculing Shi Feng's foolish actions. Alright, that's enough. Let's hurry and retreat. If Noya comes after us again, we will truly be finished, the leading elementalist said. Everyone nodded silently before escaping the valley. Despite their ridicule, they still felt very grateful towards Shi Feng. Just the brief battle against Noya's doppelgangers had reduced their numbers to less than 60. If things had dragged on, none of them would have walked out of here alive. As everyone turned to leave, the ranger who had previously used Eagle Eyes suddenly exclaimed, "Team leader Blue Frost, that swordsman is still alive." Alive? How can this be? Not even a shield warrior with protection blessing and shield wall can survive. How could a swordsman possibly live after that attack? The leading elementalist named Blue Frost could not bring himself to believe the ranger's words. It's true. If you don't believe me, you can ask the other rangers as well. The ranger replied, his shock clearly written all over his face. Curious, the other rangers also activated Eagle Eyes and looked towards the cliff. Immediately they all found themselves tongue-tied. When Blue Frost saw the shocked expressions on the other rangers' faces, he had no choice but to believe it to be true. Who is that? Blue Frost could not help but ask. Against such an attack, their team of 100 could only embrace their deaths. It was simply impossible for them to block it. Yet, this mysterious swordsman had survived against that frightening power. In Blue Frost's memory, a person with such capabilities did not exist. Even those Mavericks he knew of were incapable of doing so. At this moment, Shi Feng slowly stepped away from the broken cliff, his HP holding steady at 100%. Such frightening power. Shi Feng stretched, the bones all over his body cracking and popping. After receiving over a dozen Dark Annihilation attacks, he felt as if his entire body was about to fall apart. If not for the invincible effect of Absolute Defense, he would be a dead man by now. In God's domain, attack and defense skills were not absolute. In front of absolute power, even invulnerability was useless. Fortunately, Absolute Defense was not a skill that current bosses could overcome. If he had chosen to use parry or defensive blade, he would most likely be dead. Seeing Shi Feng still alive, Noya's anger burned even brighter. Ignoring its weakened body, the Great Lord swung its scythe toward Shi Feng, adamant in reaping the swordsman's life. You're still not giving up? Do you really think that I won't fight you? Shi Feng frowned. Immediately he activated Heavenly Dragon's power and Blade Liberation, jumping up to meet the gargoyle in battle. Even if the Great Lord were in peak condition, Shifeng would still be confident of putting up a good fight. Heavenly Dragon's power increased Shifeng's strength attribute by 100%, and defense and HP by 300%. Immediately Shifeng's HP broke past 30,000. His defense climbed to more than double that of an MT of the same level. As for Blade Liberation, when the skill was used on the level 30 Abyssal Blade, Shifeng's strength increased by 90%. His agility also increased by 90%. Although Shifeng's body had not changed, the power within him right now resembled that of an ancient beast. The Abyssal Blade transformed into a streak of light as it struck the black scythe in Noya's hands. Boom. An explosion shook the air. Shifeng's attack grounded the level 40 Great Lord, forcing the gargoyle to retreat by 2 steps as it landed on the ground. The ground shattered with each step. In contrast, Shifeng managed to land effortlessly. Turning his feet slightly, he dashed towards the Great Lord. After activating Heavenly Dragon's power and Blade Liberation, Shifeng's mind experienced serenity and clarity like never before. As he arrived before Noya, he activated Purgatory's power, increasing both his attack speed and damage once more. His arm that held onto the Abyssal Blade then reflexively used Chop. 3 full silver moons struck Noya's body from 3 different directions. The Abyssal Blade instantly pierced Noya's skin, which was harder than steel. The Great Lord released an anguished cry as the force of the attack threw it backward, frightening damages appearing above his head, one after another. Minus 5,540, minus 8,346, minus 16,650. The final strike of Chop was even a critical hit. In total, Chop devoured more than 30,000 HP from Noya. System: Chop completion rate 98%, resulting in 160% of skills effect. Skill proficiency +4. Shifeng broke his previous record. Noya raged. It tried to counterattack, but unfortunately for the Great Lord, Shifeng had long since sensed its intentions. Shifting his body slightly, he easily dodged the gargoyle's claw. He then leaped into the air, tightening his grip on the Abyssal Blade. In the next moment, countless arcs of lightning and scorching flames emerged from the Abyssal Blade, which then transformed into a meteor that plummeted towards the Great Lord's head. Every movement had been fluid and natural. Shifeng felt as if he had gathered all his strength to a single point, the tip of his sword. The instant he swung the Abyssal Blade, he felt incomparable satisfaction. Although Noya tried to defend with its scythe, the spatial suppression of Thunder Flame Explosion caused the Great Lord's movements to turn sluggish. Noya could not keep up with the Abyssal Blade's descending speed at all. Boom. Fire and lightning consumed Noya. Minus 36,154. System: Thunder Flame Explosion completion rate 100%, resulting in 220% of skills effect. Skill proficiency +4. Is he human? The District 1 players who watched from afar were stupefied, shock filling their hearts. A player was actually capable of overwhelming a level 40 Great Lord all by himself. If others heard of this, nobody would believe such a tale. Yet, that was exactly the situation they had just witnessed. Chapter 586, Creating a Legend. Leader: who is that? The vice leader of the team, a beautiful level 29 female cleric named Evening Lotus, could not help but ask as she looked to Blue Frost. Blue Frost was the #1 player in District 1. Not only were his combat techniques excellent, but he also possessed plenty of contacts. He knew a lot of experts and even a few rarely seen Mavericks. Moreover, he had been a beta tester of God's Domain before the game had launched. Out of all of the players of the available shelters, nobody was more familiar with God's Domain than Blue Frost. I wish to know that as well, Blue Frost replied, smiling bitterly as he shook his head. None of the experts I know of are capable of reaching such a standard. Just a single attack from Shifeng had managed to cause over minus 30,000 damage to Noya. Shifeng's damage could already rival the damage of their entire 100-man team. The difference between them was inconceivable. Blue Frost recognized himself as one of the players standing at the top of God's Domain. However, after experiencing Shifeng's power, he finally realized that there would always be a sky above the clouds. It would be great if we can befriend him. Such an expert will definitely be one of God's Domain's leading figures in the future. If we can become friends with him, it could massively help our District 1's shelter, Evening Lotus stated. Indeed. If we can recruit such an expert into our shelter, we will become one of the strongest shelters out there. Blue Frost nodded in agreement. Their District 1 was only considered the top shelter in this region. However, that was not the case when they included other regions. Currently, players could only travel to their desired destinations using their own 2 feet. Their range of activities could not extend past a single region. Hence, for now, exchanges between different regions were very inconvenient. However, that story would change once other forms of transportation appeared. When movement between regions became more convenient, more competition would certainly greet them. Naturally, their District 1 would no longer be the strongest shelter. If they had an expert like Shi Feng supporting them when such a time arrived, the position of their shelter could rise significantly. Leader, what are we going to do now? Evening Lotus asked. Currently, Shi Feng still fought an intense battle against Noya. If they joined the battlefield now, it would look like they were trying to take advantage of the situation. If that happened, rather than finding friendship with Shi Feng, they would become enemies instead. Isn't it obvious? We wait, Blue Frost said very definitively. Wouldn't it be a pity if we lost the chance to befriend such an impressive expert? We have the perfect opportunity to do so right now. Although he is very powerful, he must have used some sort of berserk skill to achieve such strength. Such skills won't have a long duration. Sooner or later he will have to escape. At that time, if we lend him a helping hand, won't it be easy to get acquainted with him? Evening Lotus nodded in agreement after hearing these words. Mavericks were very arrogant. Normally they did not bother with people like them. Hence it was not easy to befriend a Maverick. However, if they sacrificed themselves to save Shi Feng, even a powerful Maverick like him would be willing to get to know them. Hearing Blue Frost's words, the other members of the team also expressed their agreement. It was not easy to earn the favor of a Maverick. It was especially true for a Maverick like Shi Feng. If they could get such an expert to owe them a favor, they would not mind suffering some deaths or injuries. Hence, everyone quickly started to prepare. As soon as Shi Feng turned to flee, they would move in to hinder the Great Lord. Currently, Shi Feng had no idea what was going on around him. He was already intoxicated with the feeling from his previous attack. Is this what a 100% completion rate feels like? Shi Feng looked at the abyssal blade in his hand in disbelief, his mind recalling the previous attack. Since he had begun playing God's Domain, this was the first time he had achieved a 100% skill completion rate. The sensation was simply wondrous. As a result of Thunder Flame Explosion achieving a 100% completion rate, the skill displayed 220% of its effect. Although the skill's fainted effect was ineffective against the Great Lord, the gargoyle had received the movement speed reduction debuff in full. Moreover, due to Shi Feng achieving a 100% skill completion rate, Noya's speed, which originally would have reduced to 1/6 of its normal speed, had now reduced to 1/13 of its original. The debuff's duration also lasted over a dozen seconds. Even if the Great Lord were at its peak, having its speed reduced to only 1/13 of its original would slow it to a turtle's pace, not to mention the current Noya, who had suffered 2 debuffs already. Noya's current attack and movement speeds were as effective as if it were in a fainted state. At this moment, even a level 1 could go up and give Noya a kick without dying. Shi Feng also knew that this was a great opportunity that would not be available a second time. Currently, Noya only had 2 million HP remaining. Not only was it suffering from 2 weakening debuffs, but it had also received a Thunder Flame Explosion at 100% completion rate. Most importantly, Shi Feng was at his peak. Finish it. This thought suddenly emerged in Shi Feng's mind. Originally, Shi Feng had intended to drive off Noya temporarily before shifting his focus to breaking the Grey Barrier. However, the rare opportunity before him was simply too tempting. That was a Field Great Lord. Even the loot of an ordinary Field Lord was astounding, with fine gold equipment being the most common among the drops. If one were lucky, they could even obtain dark gold equipment. Meanwhile, High Lords had a very high possibility of dropping dark gold equipment. As for Great Lords, they would drop dark gold equipment with 100% certainty, and there was even a good chance of epic items dropping. Even if no epic items dropped, there would still be forging designs, recipes, and materials of equal value. In the past, even after sacrificing thousands of lives to kill a Great Lord of the same level, a guild would still profit. One could just imagine how frightening a Great Lord's value was. Currently, a greatly weakened level 40 Great Lord stood before him. How could he let such a golden opportunity go? Without hesitation, Shifeng activated 9 Dragon Slash and Phantom Kill. He even activated Black Emperor, the trump card he had saved all this time. Blade Liberation's effect only lasted 20 seconds. After these 20 seconds, if he were still unable to kill Noya, he would have no choice but to give up and run. Hence, Shifeng decided to use all of his available skills. Immediately, Shifeng, his doppelganger, and the 12 Abyssal Blade Phantoms attacked Noya. With its speed reduced, Noya was incapable of resisting the attacks. However, Shifeng was still not satisfied. Pointing the Abyssal Blade towards the sky, he activated the magic weapon's newest skill, Abyssal Curse. Clouds of black mist suddenly covered the sky. These clouds then submerged themselves into Noya's body. Immediately, the gargoyle howled with anguish. Although a Great Lord possessed very high resistances, Abyssal Curse still managed to reduce 10% of Noya's attributes. As a result, not only did Noya's HP fall to 1,800,000, its defense also significantly decreased. At the same time, the 12 Abyssal Blade Phantoms assaulted the Great Lord with a constant stream of attacks. Each phantom dealt over -1,500 damage, -3,000 damage if it were a critical hit. Fortunately, the Abyssal Blade had a critical chance of 50%. In total, the 12 Abyssal Blades were capable of dealing up to -30,000 damage every second. There was even less need to mention Shifeng's doppelganger, who had activated Blade Liberation. Every casual attack from the doppelganger dealt over -3,000 damage, or over -6,000 damage if it was a critical hit. Including the damage from by various skills, the doppelganger's damage output was simply mind-blowing. The numerous critical hits allowed Shifeng to accumulate 30 stacks of death auras quickly. He also continuously utilized the death auras to reduce his skills' cooldowns. Although the death auras could only be used to reduce the cooldown of skills he had learned, it was still a very powerful effect. Take the Tier 1 chop for example. Shifeng could instantly remove the skill's cooldown by using a stack of death auras. As for skills such as Thunder Flame Explosion and Thundering Flash, Shifeng could use them every 3 to 4 seconds. Every one of these skills could destroy more than 20,000 or 30,000 of Noya's HP. Moreover, Shifeng continued to hack at the Great Lord with the Abyssal Blade, devouring HP as the magic weapon's passive attribute quickly accumulated a bonus of 20% damage. As the recipient of these attacks, Noya's remaining 1,800,000 HP decreased at a rate visible to the naked eye. In total, the Great Lord lost around 90,000 HP every second. In 10 short seconds, Noya's HP fell below 1 million. However, Blade Liberation's duration was reaching its end. During Shifeng's initial collision with Noya, he had wasted nearly 1 second. Taking everything into account, he now had less than 9 seconds to finish Noya off. Blade Liberation had a very powerful backlash. Once the skill's duration ended, Shifeng's attributes would instantly reduce by 80%. At that time, even if Noya only had several tens of thousands of HP remaining, the Great Lord could easily kill him. Bring it on. Shifeng gritted his teeth. Right now he was in a race against time. Suddenly, Shifeng sucked in a mouthful of air as he activated Dragon Breath. A white beam lanced through the Great Lord Noya, causing critical damage of over -50,000 points. Shifeng immediately followed up with a firestorm. With both Heavenly Dragon's power and Blade Liberation activated, Firestorm's power became even more frightening. Dragons of fire descended from the sky, one after another, completely devouring the level 40 gargoyle and turning the Great Lord's surroundings into a sea of flames. Meanwhile, damages of over -30,000 and even -60,000 points appeared on Noya's head. Firestorm lasted a full 5 seconds. During this time, Shifeng continued his relentless assault on the Great Lord. When only 4 seconds were left on Blade Liberation, Noya still had 500,000 HP. The final strike, Flame Burst. Shifeng shouted, the Abyssal Blade instantly transforming into a miniature sun. At this time, Shifeng's doppelganger had similarly activated Flame Burst. Shifeng then activated Divine Providence, a faint golden glow suddenly enveloping his body. Knowing that death was already on its doorstep, Noya's eyes suddenly glowed a bloody red. It had actually managed to break free from the movement speed reduction debuff and brandished its scythe at Shifeng. Every strike from the scythe seemed capable of cutting apart space itself. This was also the last skill in Neuya's arsenal, the Tier 2 Taboo skill, Death's Tribute. This move was a domain skill, and it was capable of causing horrific amounts of damage to enemies within a certain range. Upon Death's Tribute's activation, the area 50 yards around Neuya turned deathly silent. Wraiths and evil spirits began to emerge from the ground. There were also dark blades moving through the area, and anything that came into contact with these blades immediately turned into sand and dirt. What kind of battle is this? Evening Lotus was shocked as she watched the battle from afar. On one side there was the sun. On the other, the end of the world had arrived. If players like them participated in this battle, they would die instantly, without even ash remaining of their bodies. Die. At this moment, Shifeng couldn't care less what the Great Lord was trying to do. Without hesitation he dove straight into Death Tribute's domain. If he did not fight now, once Blade Liberation's time was up, he would not be a match for the Great Lord. 24 consecutive strikes. One after another, miniature suns melded into the darkness of Death's Tribute. In the next moment, Shifeng and his doppelganger struck the Great Lord Neuya a total of 24 times, each strike accurately hitting Neuya's weak points. Every one of Shifeng's attacks dealt over -20,000 damage and -40,000 with a critical hit. As for the doppelganger, every one of its attacks dealt over -10,000 damage and -20,000 if it were a critical hit. In the blink of an eye, 24 dazzling blades of light illuminated the gloomy valley. Neuya's remaining 500,000 HP plunged to zero, frustration filling the gargoyle's eyes as its body fell to the ground. At this moment Shifeng also knelt. His complexion was deathly pale. Fresh blood covered his entire body as if he had just taken a dip in a gory pool. As for his remaining HP, he had less than 500. Chapter 587, Frightening Harvest of a Great Lord. He won? Blue Frost and the others, who had waited patiently for the time to save Shifeng, were dumbfounded. They could not bring themselves to believe what their eyes had just witnessed. A single player had actually defeated a level 40 Great Lord. Although they had seen other Mavericks defeat the monsters serving as gatekeepers to new maps, that was in the past. The monsters those Mavericks had gone up against had merely been lords. A Great Lord, on the other hand, was on a completely different level. This fact had been reinforced after they witnessed Neuya's ultimate move, Death's Tribute. Everything within 50 yards of the Great Lord had turned into sand and dirt. No living creature could survive in that domain. Isn't that person way too powerful? He actually survived the Great Lord's ultimate move. Just how high are his HP and defense? A level 29 Shield Warrior exclaimed. Back when the Shield Warrior had received Neuya's normal attack, despite having activated Shield Wall, he had still received over -4,000 damage. If he had not possessed Shield Wall's 50% damage reduction effect, he would have died on the spot. Shield Warriors and Guardian Knights wielded shields. Not only could one's shield increase a player's defense, but they also possessed a block rate. It was why these two classes could serve as a team's MTs. However, Neuya's Death's Tribute was not a normal attack. It was a powerful AoE skill. Yet, Shifeng had still managed to survive after receiving it. His defense and HP were inconceivable. In reality, Shifeng was also rejoicing. He truly had not expected to survive Neuya's last attack. The power of the Tier 2 Taboo skill, Death's Tribute, was no joke. Even against a player of the same level, their chances of survival were practically nil. It was the same even if said player was an MT who had activated a life-saving skill. Although Heavenly Dragon's power increased both his defense and HP by 300%, the might of a Tier 2 Taboo skill rivaled that of a Tier 3 skill. Defeating a mere Tier 1 player like himself would be child's play for Neuya. Even a Tier 2 player would be badly crippled if they managed to survive. With the remaining 30,000 HP he had at the time, he should have had no chance of surviving the ordeal. Shifeng could only think of one reason for his miraculous survival. Magic resistance. Death's Tribute was an attack that combined both physical and magical damage, with magical damage as the main component. Meanwhile, his high magic resistance had negated a large amount of the Taboo skill's magical damage, and as a result, allowed him to survive. "Leader, are we still going over to meet him?" Evening Lotus asked after recovering from her stupor. "Yes, of course we're going. He has just achieved such a feat, and we are the witnesses of this legend. How can we not go and congratulate him? At this moment, Blue Frost's eyes were filled with reverence as he looked at Shi Feng. To them, a great lord was an immovable mountain. Blue Frost even had yet to hear of anyone throughout God's domain overcoming this mountain. Yet, the man before them had easily scaled it, achieving a miracle that nobody had managed until now. On the other side, Shi Feng did not remain idle. After killing Noya, Shi Feng's level instantly rose by 1, pushing him to level 33 and allowing him to recover significantly. Immediately after, Shi Feng sent a few slashes at the Grey Barrier. Blade Liberation was still in effect, so it was the best chance for him to shatter the barrier around the gate. Previously, before Shi Feng had used any of his berserk skills, the Grey Barrier barely defended against Shi Feng's attacks. Now, however, it had only taken a few swings to shatter the Grey Barrier. Like a balloon being poked with a needle, the barrier released a pop as it shattered completely. Shi Feng then jumped up and retrieved the black slate tablet from the stone gate. I finally got it. Shi Feng grinned at the Chapter of Darkness that was shrouded in a faint layer of demonic aura. Chapter of Darkness, Dark Gold rank item. The Chapter of Darkness brims with soul energy. You may pass it to a shelter's caretaker to enhance the shelter's power and activate a portion of the Chapter of Darkness's ability. Shi Feng then stored the Chapter of Darkness away with satisfaction. Now that he had obtained the Chapter of Darkness, his task here was finally complete. What's left for him now was to collect the loot from Great Lord Noya. The moment Shi Feng arrived before Noya's body, Blade Liberation's effect ended. Suddenly his whole body lost strength and his feet caught air. His attributes sharply reduced by 80% as well. At this moment he was not even as powerful as an ordinary player. The aftereffects of using twofold Berserk sure is severe. Even my mental power has nearly depleted. Shi Feng suddenly felt a powerful migraine assaulting his head, and all he wanted was to lie down and sleep. If not for the Great Lord's enticing loot, he would have logged out to rest that instant. Noya was as tall as a 3-story building. Despite Shi Feng having activated Divine Providence before killing the gargoyle, a jackpot had not occurred. Loot had not covered the ground around Noya's body at all. On the contrary, Shi Feng only saw 6 items beside Noya's body. Are the monsters in the dark den all so stingy? Shi Feng frowned. If he had killed a great lord outside the dark den, the monster would have dropped a minimum of 10 items. Although Shi Feng had not hoped that Divine Providence would grant him a jackpot from a great lord, was there a need to be this shabby? After all the trouble he went through, he had only obtained 6 items. Shi Feng then picked up one item after another. With each subsequent item Shi Feng picked up, his heart grew increasingly colder. He had only managed to encounter such a heaven-sent opportunity after much difficulty, yet, in the end, this was all he got in return. Out of the 3 items he had already picked up, all 3 were pieces of level 40 dark gold equipment. None of these pieces were even set equipment, not to mention weapons. When Shi Feng collected the 5th item, however, he was suddenly dumbfounded. Teleportation Magic Array Design. When Shi Feng saw this item, he began to have visions of mountains of gold. Players residing in the dark den might be unfamiliar with teleportation arrays as their only form of travel was by foot, but to players outside the dark den, they were quite familiar with the concept. After all, when players outside the dark den traveled to faraway maps to grind monsters, they normally used teleportation arrays to save on travel time. However, teleportation arrays could not teleport a player to every corner of God's domain, as a majority of the locations in God's domain did not possess a teleportation array. For such locations, players could only teleport to the nearest map and run the rest of the way. Even then, they would still have to waste a large amount of time. Meanwhile, the teleportation magic array design could easily solve this problem. As long as one paid a certain price and constructed a teleportation magic array at a grinding spot, players could easily teleport to that location. Of course, unlike the teleportation arrays one would normally find in the teleportation halls, which allowed teleportation between various large cities, the teleportation arrays one could construct with this forging design were the simplest version, a 1-to-1 teleportation array. These teleportation arrays only allowed teleportation between 2 locations. Even so, it was something many guilds dreamed of obtaining. Only, teleportation magic array designs were not that easily obtainable. Normally, great lords or above dropped them. Moreover, their drop rate was horrifically low. There was no guarantee one would obtain a design even after killing 100 great lords. On the market, a single teleportation magic array design was worth more than 10 epic items. Its value was only less than fragmented legendary items. However, nobody would be so foolish as to sell the teleportation magic array designs they obtained. For such a strategic level item, not a single player would willingly trade it even if they were offered 20 or 30 epic items. Depending on the level of an epic item, there would come a time when it would lose its value. However, teleportation magic array designs would never have such a problem. In the past, even after God's domain had been in operation for over a decade, these forging designs were still incomparably valuable. These were better at maintaining their value than any other item in the game. Chapter 588, System Upgrade. My efforts weren't in vain. Shi Feng sighed as he stored the teleportation magic array design. This single forging design made all of his efforts worth it. His trip to the Dark Den had not been wasted at all. While a piece of epic equipment might improve the combat power of a single player, a single teleportation magic array design could improve a guild as a whole. As players reached higher levels, the maps they would journey to would be much farther away from cities. Currently, players visiting leveling maps around level 30 could still reduce their travel time significantly by utilizing the teleportation arrays in cities. However, maps after level 35 practically had no available arrays. Players were required to run across at least one entire map to get to their desired destinations. Even if players did not rest and did not encounter any monsters on their journey, with players' current levels, they would require at least 3 hours to cross a map. Moreover, the higher level the map was, the larger it would be, which would result in longer travel times. Hence, after players reached level 35, it was very normal to return to cities only once every 2 or 3 days. They would return only after they had exhausted their consumable items or when their equipment was in dire need of repair. With a teleportation array, Zero Wings members could return to the city or go out to the fields anytime they wished, saving plenty of time. They also wouldn't need to stay on guard throughout the night. They could easily return to the guild residence. With this, Zero Wings members could grind more efficiently, widening the gap between them and other guilds. Shi Feng picked up the last item that Noya had dropped. The last item was a dark gold whistle decorated with many complex runes carved into its metal. A mount. Shi Feng was shocked once more when he saw this whistle. Mounts were one of the means of transport in God's domain. After all, God's domain was massive. Not only was it laborious to travel from place to place constantly, but it would also take a huge toll on a player's body. This was where mounts came into play. Shi Feng was no stranger to mounts. In the past, as the guild leader of a second-rate guild, he had plenty of mounts to choose from. However, the mount he just obtained was different from those in the past. This was a dark gold mount. In God's domain, like equipment, mounts were categorized into different ranks. There were common, bronze, mysterious iron, secret silver, fine gold, dark gold, epic and even legendary rank. Mounts of different quality possessed varying abilities. Common mounts could only be used for transportation, and they provided an additional movement speed bonus of 100%. In other words, a journey that one would normally take 2 hours to complete would only take an hour, saving players plenty of time. As long as players reached a certain level, they could go to cities and purchase the most common mounts. Bronze mounts were slightly rarer, and not only could they be used as a means of transport, but they also possessed some offensive capabilities. They provided an additional movement speed bonus of 120%. Bronze mounts could not be purchased in cities and were only available through some high-level rare quests, large-scale team dungeons, or when a player's reputation with certain powers reached a specific level. It was extremely difficult for ordinary players to obtain bronze mounts. As for mysterious iron mounts, other than having significant improvements to their offensive capabilities, they could also carry items for players, having the same capacity as a player's mobile bag. The mounts also increased a player's movement speed by 150%. Such mounts could only be obtained through super rare quests or large-scale team dungeons with a low drop rate. Secret silver mounts were extremely rare. Not only did they possess strong offensive capabilities, but they also possessed some special skills that could be used to assist players. They could also carry more items than mysterious iron mounts, and the movement speed bonus they provided was 180%. They were even rarer than multiple pieces of dark gold equipment. Fine gold mounts were as rare as a phoenix feather. Not even the guild leader of a large guild would have one. A fine gold mount's strength was the equivalent of a special elite's of the same level, and it provided 220% movement speed bonus. A fine gold mount was no less rare than 2 or 3 epic items. Dark gold mounts were even more impressive. The mount itself was already the equivalent of a chieftain of the same level. In addition, it also had special skills that made it even stronger than an ordinary chieftain. As for the movement speed bonus, a dark gold mount provided 280%. In the past, the best mount Shifeng had obtained was fine gold rank. He never expected that he would actually obtain a dark gold mount from killing a single great lord. His luck was inconceivable. Even grand lords have an extremely low chance of dropping dark gold mounts. The drop rate from great lords should be practically zero. This could be a system reward item for killing this great lord gatekeeper. Shifeng rejoiced as he examined the dark gold whistle in his hand. In God's domain, players could purchase mounts in cities once they reached level 40. Shifeng had originally planned to complete some rare quests to obtain a mysterious iron mount once he reached level 40. However, that was no longer necessary. With a dark gold mount, he could move even faster than when he activated Wind Rider. Moreover, Wind Rider had a limited duration, whereas a dark gold mount had no such limitation. In addition, a dark gold mount possessed significant combat power and special skills. Overall, while out in the fields, a dark gold mount was far more useful than an epic item. Unfortunately, it will still be some time before I reach level 40. When Shifeng thought about how powerful a dark gold mount was, he looked forward to the day he could equip this mount of his. Mounts in God's domain were not static. They could become stronger if nurtured properly. In the beginning, bronze and mysterious iron mounts only possessed combat power equivalent to that of a common monster of the same level. However, through careful nurturing, it was not impossible to raise their combat power to the standard of an elite or special elite. Naturally, dark gold mounts had far greater potential. From the moment they were born, they were already as strong as a chieftain of the same level. After nurturing, they could easily become lords or even high lords. In the past, Shifeng had seen many wealthy players and upper echelons of first-rate guilds parade their lord-ranked mounts on the streets, attracting shock and awe of many players. Compared to luxury cars in the real world, these mounts were several times more impressive. Lord-ranked monsters were bosses in 20-man team dungeons. If one could ride such a monster, one could just imagine what kind of deterrent it would be. If Shifeng could nurture his dark gold mount to become a high lord quickly, it would significantly improve his combat power. Just as Shifeng stored away the dark gold whistle and was about to turn around and leave, the sound of a system notification suddenly rang out by his ear. System announcement: God's domain will be undergoing a system upgrade. The system upgrade will require 10 real-time hours. All players must log out of the game within 10 minutes. Why has the third evolution started so soon? Shifeng was momentarily speechless. Shouldn't it initiate only after players have conquered the first 100-man team dungeon? Did a team already manage to raid one? In the past, God's domain's third evolution was one that affected the game the most. There were 2 reasons why Shifeng had not hurried to raid a 100-man team dungeon all this time. Firstly, he still lacked sufficient strength. Secondly, the impact of the third evolution was simply too massive. It was still not something that he could take advantage of at the moment. That's not right. It still shouldn't be possible for anyone to raid a 100-man team dungeon yet. The precondition for doing so is to have all players reach level 30, attain their Tier 1 classes, and achieve peak combat power of a Tier 1 class. However, even with these conditions fulfilled, the success rate of clearing a 100-man team dungeon is no more than 20%. At the very least, a team needed to be fully geared with the set equipment from the 50-man team dungeons to have even a 30% to 40% success rate. Shifeng shook his head, immediately denying this possibility. Currently, all of the various large guilds were still trying to conquer 50-man team dungeons. How could they possibly have raided a 100-man team dungeon successfully? Shifeng had to admit that the system evolution this time would greatly impact his plans. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.